than Israel over the past few days. Do stay with us. We're back at the top of the hour.
This is a region that is rapidly developing, but it's one also that is afflicted by conflicts, political upheavals. We try to balance these stories, the good, the bad, the ugly, and give the people who allow us into their lives dignity and humanity as we tell their stories.
The Geneva International Motor Show is coming to Qatar.
Morning, Suzanne.
Discover more at jimsqa.com. Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani International Anti-Corruption Excellence Award.
Hey, Pope Phil.
Nominate your hero now.
These are live
we understand
cameras
the differences and similarities
in and
of
around the
cultures
Gaza
across the
Strip
world.
right now.
So no matter where you call home, Al Jazeera will bring you the news and current affairs that matter to you.
I don't want the American news playing in the
Jazeera.
background. I would rather have something like this, the Al
Undercover
Jazeera news.
reporting.
Somebody that's over there who actually knows a
Exclusive
little more what's
stories,
going on instead
explosive
of
results.
some lady
Al
behind the
Jazeera
Ohio
investigations.
news desk, you know what I mean?
Scenes of devastation in Gaza as Israeli airstrikes hit the port. At least 830 Palestinians have been killed since Saturday. I'm Cyril Vanier. It's good to have you with us. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha with our continuing special coverage of the Gaza-Israel war. Also coming up, Hamas launches hundreds of rockets towards the Israeli city of Ashkelon. It says it's in response to Israel's continued pounding of Gaza. Israel shells Lebanon after rocket fire from Hezbollah fighters will be live at the border in southern Lebanon. The Israeli army is still recovering bodies in the aftermath of the Hamas attack on Saturday. At least 900 people were killed.
I swear to God, every different news report tells a different number about how many people were killed. I don't think
So we
anybody
begin in
knows how
Gaza,
many
where the
people were
Israeli
actually
military
killed
is
yet.
continuing its bombardment for a fourth day. At least 830 Palestinians have been killed. That includes 140 children and 7 journalists. Air and artillery strikes have pounded the strip from north to south, targeting the ports. In fact, within the last few hours, those are the pictures there. There are growing concerns about the humanitarian situation as Israel has imposed a total siege, cutting off all supplies of food, water, and fuel. Rasul Sardar reports.
Building after building, block after block. All are now leveled. Many people inside, including children and the elderly, did not have time to escape. By midday on Tuesday, Israel had bombed nearly 2,000 locations in the densely populated Gaza Strip, and promised to intensify its assault, leaving the 2.3 million Palestinians living there with nowhere to go.
So this
The
picture on
Israeli
the
army
bottom
made a
middle
phone
is
call to a
live
person
feed,
who wasn't here.
and
He
there
was
are
in Al Rimal.
explosions happening
We came
there.
running and they told one of our neighbors that the building has to be evacuated. Where should they go? They said they can go to the sea. People started running and suddenly we heard an explosion. My brother's 2 children were standing in the doorway. They were killed.
On Monday, the Israeli defense minister announced a complete siege of the Gaza Strip, cutting off supplies of electricity, fuel, food, and water. The unrelenting bombardment of homes, communication towers, hospitals, roads, and mosques has become a daily occurrence.
Our
Yeah,
area Al
number's not
Ramal
gonna
is a
be known
quiet
for a
area,
while.
but when I came here,
I
I
mean, I
didn't
imagine
recognize it.
they're
It's
just
completely destroyed. All its
getting
features have
that
changed.
number off of the
This
dead
is unfair.
bodies, but I
This is
imagine
terrorism. There's no
whole-
humanity. Families here live in peace
hundreds
and do
of
not have
people
any
probably
links to
buried.
anything. What happened was revenge, a crime.
People are searching for survivors under the rubble. Nowhere is safe. And there is nowhere to go, they say.
We are told to evacuate the eastern part of Khan Yunis and go to a safe place, but there is no safe place in the Gaza Strip.
This hospital in Rafah is understaffed and under-equipped, and the number of people arriving here needing treatment keeps growing. Some of these children's parents have died. Many don't know yet how much they have lost.
Now there's a real massacre being committed against innocent civilians in the Sabra area. There are dozens of victims, and ambulances and civilian vehicles are still evacuating the victims from this house that was directly targeted.
Journalists reporting on the front lines of this war have also become targets. They, like many of Gaza's faces, are now gone forever. The Israeli airstrikes have already killed hundreds of people and injured thousands. But people in Gaza fear the worst is still to come. Rasul Sardar, Al Jazeera.
Well, our correspondents are covering this across the region. We're in Ashdod in southern Israel, where we will be covering Israel's troop movements. We'll have Israeli political reaction from West Jerusalem. First, though, let's go to Tarek Abu Azoum in Gaza. Tarek, over the last hour that I've been watching the live shot of the skies over Gaza, we've seen multiple strikes. One, however, and we still have the shot of that, is the aftermath. This is what I'm looking at right now, the aftermath of a strike on boats that were docked in a port along the Gaza coastline. Do you know what was hit and why?
Well, the Israeli bombardment of the Gaza Strip did not stop since today's morning. Today only, the Israeli air forces had bombed the Gaza Strip with more than 50 airstrikes, destroying dozens of residential houses, industrial factories and public infrastructure. According to the Palestinian Ministry of Health inside the Gaza Strip, the death toll has risen to more than 830 Palestinians killed, with more than 4,250 others wounded. Obviously, the Israeli air forces are using excessive power and force against targeting Palestinians inside the Gaza Strip. Now, after these places were hit by the Israeli air forces,
Pope.
we made a quick look and visit to these places. These places had turned into ashes in glance, which reflects the level of destruction and the level of severity that happened in that place. Now, in retaliation to the Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip during this day, the Palestinian militant groups fired hundreds of rockets towards the Israeli settlements. Now, the majority of targets that had been struck inside the Gaza Strip were residential houses, and the majority of even casualties were among young kids and women also. Humanitarianly, the situation in the Gaza Strip is deteriorating.
Tarek, can I get you to pause
international
for a second?
and the world.
Because as you speak, we are watching the live pictures of the skies over Gaza. I'm not entirely sure of what I'm seeing, in the sense that I don't know if the rockets that I'm seeing are incoming or outgoing.
Let me pull this up. This is
I
live
would surmise that there are rockets being fired from Gaza. Can you see or hear anything?
Now, in the place that I'm covering from, I can't see any kind of, let's say, firings or even bombardment. I can only hear the voice. I cannot really see.
Well, I'll tell you something, Tarek. It's becoming a little bit clearer. It appears to be rockets that are outgoing, meaning fired from Gaza. Quite a number of them appear to be intercepted. That would be by Israel's Iron Dome defensive system. So my question would be, Hamas is still in a position to launch rockets from the Gaza Strip as we speak. Is that correct?
Exactly, Blue.
Well, the militant group Hamas inside the Gaza Strip continues to fire rockets from time to time towards the Israeli settlement in retaliation
subscribers
to the
can pay for their air
attacks
flight over
that
there.
happened inside the Gaza Strip. As everyone followed in the news, that the situation and the places inside the Gaza Strip were heavily bombarded, and even the level of destruction that took place in Gaza Strip is absolutely high. And this kind of destruction Palestinians hadn't witnessed throughout the last and previous confrontations between both parts. According to the humanitarian condition inside the Gaza Strip, Palestinians now are living without enough clean water sources and without enough even food supplies inside the Gaza Strip. Accordingly, the World Health Organization calls for opening humanitarian corridors in order to send medical supplies and humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip in order to help the people of Gaza.
Yeah, Tarek Abu Azoum reporting live from inside Gaza for us as we continue to watch the skies over the Gaza Strip. Let's go to Mohammed Jamjoum. Mohammed, you're joining us live from Zikim in southern Israel. It's not far from the Gaza border. Now,
you got that right,
we
Blue.
just saw what
nothing but suffering, my
what
friend.
appeared to be rockets fired from Gaza, and a fair few of them being
first
shot
class,
down by
right,
Israel's
Phil?
Iron Dome system. I don't know exactly.
I'd start a GoFundMe for that.
If you're near where that happened, can you tell us anything about the rockets being fired from Gaza?
Sarah, let me tell you where we are. We're in an area called Zikim Junction, which is outside of Zikim. Now, behind me, that direction, that's Gaza. We're about 3 kilometers north of Gaza. Yes, and in just the past few minutes, we saw several rockets launched from Gaza, intercepted by the Iron Dome missile defense system. So we saw lots of flashes of light in the sky. We heard lots of booms, lots of thuds. The Iron Dome system certainly activated. We are trying to get information about if any of those rockets that were launched from Gaza landed anywhere in the area next to us. We are also about 5 kilometers north of Ashkelon. I mention that because just about 2 hours ago, you had a massive barrage of rockets launched from Gaza towards Ashkelon. And what we've heard from authorities here is that at least one of those rockets launched from Gaza did hit inside Ashkelon, that it hit a building there. There was at least one woman injured as a result of that rocket attack. Now, Ashkelon had actually been warned earlier in the day by Hamas. Hamas putting out a statement telling citizens and residents in Ashkelon to evacuate by 5 o'clock when they intended to attack Ashkelon. We are right now trying to figure out if there have been any injuries as a result of that last rocket barrage. But yes, you asked if we were in a position where we witnessed that. We certainly did. The situation here got a lot more tense in the last 10 minutes. Over the course of the last couple of hours, you've had several occasions when the folks assembled here have actually seen those rockets launching from Gaza and being intercepted, most of them at least, by the Iron Dome defense system.
But have the Israeli residents of Zikim stayed? Because the area around Gaza was supposed to be evacuated.
You had 103 fever, bro.
I'm glad
you're feeling better. I'm glad it broke.
To stay.
Well, let me tell you, Cyril, that as far as Zikim, earlier today, there was an incident where, in fact, there were at least 4 Hamas fighters, we're told, that infiltrated into Zakim or tried to infiltrate into Zakim by sea, and that they were killed by Israeli army officers. Now, as far as the situation inside Zakim, we have tried getting inside Zakim. We have not been able to. Security won't let people in there. The situation, as you can imagine, close to the border with Gaza, still very fluid, still very tense, because you've had these reports throughout the day. There are towns, there are villages that the Israeli army is still trying to evacuate. Even though they say they have gotten full control of this border region once again, they have also said that they are still having clashes with members of Hamas, with gunmen who have either infiltrated prior to now those towns and have hit out, or they are still possibly infiltrating from Gaza into those towns. So there's a lot of contradictory information right now still as to regards the evacuations. I can tell you we are still seeing huge amounts of troops and military equipment being transported from northern areas to the south. Every time we're on the highways here, the roads, we see more soldiers, we see more infantrymen and women, we see more reserve troops, we see more military equipment being transported.
Yeah,
so
Suzanne, this Iron Dome, I didn't even know it existed until I started watching this stuff. It's pretty amazing thing.
Into Gaza will occur potentially at any time. Cyril?
But
the problem is
those rockets being fired moments ago,
the
mostly
Iron Dome
you would see the
works
arc,
great,
the contrail of the rocket, right?
So many rockets are being fired out of
which is the interception
the
by
Gaza
the Iron Dome.
Strip
Most
that
of the rockets get
can't keep up with them all. So some get through.
It's hard to know, Cyril. It looks from our vantage point, and again, we can't have accurate precision when it comes to what we're seeing from here. We await more confirmation from the Israeli army. We await to get information from more sources. It looks to us as though most of those rockets that were launched were intercepted. Right now, though, it is dark. It is harder to tell exactly when it comes to the rockets that are coming out of Gaza, how many are coming out. But it looked to us like there were at least 10 to 12 in the last few minutes. And it did look to us from our vantage point as though most of those rockets had been intercepted by the Iron Dome missile defense system. That being said, though, the people here, because this continues to happen, even though there is mobilization, even though the situation is very tense, the people here do believe that in the hours to come, there will be more of a barrage of rocket fire. So people here very worried, very concerned, and they do expect that at any moment they would have to duck and take cover, as we did here when we first started seeing those rockets come out and first started hearing the booms and started to see how the Iron Dome defense system was intercepting those rockets. Nonetheless, we will continue to bring you those developments and more details as we confirm them. Cyril?
Al Jazeera's Mohammed Jamjoom reporting from Zakim there. That's in southern Israel. You're about, as you said, 3 kilometers away from the north of the Gaza Strip. Thank you very much, Mohammed.
This is just
I want to bring in
this
Sultan
is just
Barakat,
part of it too. You know,
with us in Doha this afternoon, this evening.
Because Iran are the people that are
director
training
of the Global Institute for Strategic Research at Hamad bin Khalifa University here in Doha.
And
one thing
leading
that's notable
Hamas,
about this, and I'm wondering if you could speak to this for our viewers. Israel says that it has been carrying out its most intense bombardment of Gaza ever. Yesterday, I remember you telling me that they have precise knowledge of what's happening in the Gaza Strip, that Israeli intelligence, they've mapped out, every square meter, I think I'm paraphrasing what you were saying, of the Gaza Strip. Yet clearly, 4 days into this, Hamas is still in a position to launch volleys of rockets regularly into Israeli territory.
Yes. Well, I think we need to put those rockets into context. I think calling them rockets is a misnomer, really. I mean, these are projectiles with homemade explosives and to various degrees. They're not, if you look at the amount of damage or casualties they've caused over the last few days, thousands of them resulted with very little damage compared to a very light machine gun with a couple of people,
Well, hold on. I've seen some buildings. I've seen some buildings defaced. I've seen entire sections of buildings crumbled to the floor. And secondly, those rockets, if they can reach Tel Aviv or even Jerusalem, I mean, whether they're sophisticated or not, doesn't change the fact that they can go far and inflict damage.
They can inflict, but it's nothing like what Israel is capable of inflicting.
Israel has
on
one
Gaza,
of the highest,
or the modern ammunition,
high-tech armies,
sophisticated stuff that's been provided by the United States. This is a lot of it is based on homemade, very basic explosives.
I think my question is more about the challenge for the Israeli military that is currently trying to target those rocket launching spots, and we see war after war after war in the Gaza Strip that it's very difficult for them to get to those rocket launching spots.
Yeah, but this is the point we're coming to, is that because of the nature of those rockets, they're very light and mobile. And the resistance is capable of moving them from one side to another very, very quickly with very light equipment. And that makes it much more difficult for the Israelis to follow where the rocket has been launched from.
Yeah, that's a bad thing, Paul.
In addition
we
to
send
that,
money to both sides.
Israel has suffered a lot in terms of its
Not only do we
intelligence
fund
within
Israel,
the Gaza
but we
Strip.
fund Hamas
in
as
the
well.
past, they used to be able to penetrate individuals. They have their own intelligence actors within the Strip. And I think over the last
informers within
Gaza, and this is why they were they were capable of assassinating individuals in the past and so on. I think over the last few years, this has been tackled by Hamas effectively, and Israelis were left with few supporters. And the fact that
when you say tackled by Hamas, I mean I recall years ago seeing those pictures of Hamas killing Gazans whom they suspected of being informants for Israel.
Some of that does take place, yes, and they have killed some and so on. But mostly, I think the population of within the Gaza Strip has really been totally alienated by the Israelis. The continuous siege on Gaza has made it very, very difficult for anyone to stand up and say, well, I may try and understand the position of Israel on this. This has been going on for many, many years.
All right, Sultan, thank you very much. Stay with us. Israel says it has retaken control of the Gaza border and mobilized troops in the area. So far, the military has called up 300,000 reservists. Israeli opposition leader Avigdor Lieberman has called for the total elimination of Hamas. In a post on X, formerly known as Twitter,
Robert.
He says that means getting
awesome,
rid of the
Thank
group's
you.
leadership in the Gaza Strip, in Lebanon, in Malaysia, also in Qatar, wherever they are hiding, end quote. Let's go to Hoda Abdelhamid, who's in West Jerusalem. Hoda, what can you tell us about the political landscape right now, which is rapidly changing in Israel?
It is indeed. And I mean, at this stage, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been given the green light by his coalition to try to form this sort of emergency unity government. He should be talking, having more negotiations with Benny Gantz, who is his most formidable opponent, or has been at least for the last few years. But we're not there yet. What is actually happening now, and I'm sorry for that, is that the Prime Minister and the Cabinet should be shortly meeting with the security and military establishment. They call that a political security cabinet. And from what we understand, they will be discussing the military plans ahead, whether there is a ground invasion, when is that ground invasion. But I think they're also very preoccupied about the whole picture, not only about the border with Gaza, they're worried about the border in the north with Lebanon. Sorry, and they also, another challenge for them is to make sure that the occupied West Bank, who has been really tensed ever since the beginning of the year, to stay some sort of under control, and indeed here in Jerusalem, where there had been tensions around the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in the days leading before all this started. So certainly a lot for the Prime Minister and his cabinet to discuss with the security establishment about the way forward. As you mentioned, 300,000 reservists have been so far called. They have been spread around military bases all over the country, not only along the Gaza border. The government says that actually they could call up to 360,000, so another 60,000.
There went your news feed, lady. There went 3 news feeds.
Could show up very soon, but I think.
Oh, come on.
think they are calculating very closely.
What's going on here, bro? Only this middle one's the only one.
What should be the next step? We heard the rhetoric, very harsh rhetoric toward Gaza, warning the people of Gaza of very difficult times ahead, telling the people of Gaza to leave. So that.
Oh, come on.
Gives you an idea of the frame of mind of all these people when they're meeting in the next hour or
reception.
so, and how the tone would be.
Is this one
but
that I can't even understand?
There is a need for the government and the military to show that they're going to have a harsh response, harsher than what is happening now, because that's what the Israeli public is looking for and is demanding at this point. And they're going to have to show that they can probably finish this as soon as possible.
Hoda, I wonder if we know whether this, the political negotiations that are going on right now, if they're slowing down the military preparations and the military planning or not.
Well, I mean, you do have that law that was approved that would allow the cabinet, the prime minister and the defense minister to go ahead and to take decisions without consulting the rest of the cabinet. So that is already in place, that is already functioning. And I think there is an understanding that things need to happen as quick as possible. I think part of the unity government or this emergency government is twofold. At one point is to show that this is a united country, because if we just go back to a week ago, before all this started, this was a deeply divided country. You had for 38 weeks straight protest every Saturday against Prime Minister Netanyahu and his coalition government, against the judicial overhaul. Well, all of that has disappeared at this time. On the other hand, you have also the Prime Minister who knows who's going to come under a lot of criticism once the dust settles, who needs to have some political cover about what's going to happen in the days ahead. Israel cannot know what could unfold, what kind of retaliation Hamas could have, what could happen on the border with Lebanon, what would be the reaction in the wider Arab world. So I think also Prime Minister Netanyahu would want that government, so emergency government, so he can also have some political cover, saying, now everybody decided, even my political opponents were on board with every decision I took.
Hoda Abdelhamid reporting from West Jerusalem. Thank you very much. And just moments ago, you will have seen another flash over the skies of Gaza. We continue to monitor that. The Israeli army says its soldiers are in full control of all communities along the border with Gaza. Bodies are being recovered in several kibbutz close to the border. This is after Hamas's surprise attack on Saturday. Sarah Khairat is in Ramla, where families have gathered to identify the bodies of those killed in Hamas's attack.
Yeah, definitely nasty business over there, bro.
We've actually just seen what we think is a senior cabinet minister go past in blacked out cars. We've also seen some senior Israeli military officials. They've arrived
you notice how there's not any coverage of like this? There is coverage of the Ukraine war, but not like this.
Building where they deal with casualties from the police or military personnel. Of course, because the system has been so overwhelmed for the one that deals with civilians in Tel Aviv, this has become their central command building for this. In fact, you might just see that building over there with flashing lights. That seems to be a senior minister. We're not quite sure who that is yet, but there's a lot of movement coming in and out of this building. We've been seeing ambulances turning up in large numbers. We've also, we counted about 7 to 8 of those in about 40 minutes of us first arriving here. We've also seen, if you see just in that distance there, a tent that's been set up. And that tent is for family members that are coming here to see if anyone
that seems legit, Blue. Everybody knows war makes money.
A list a list that's been put together for those that have been identified, Israeli bodies that are inside a mortuary inside this building here. We've also been seeing a lot of trucks that have been coming in, big articulated trucks with bodies. We spoke to someone who's been an official person that's told us that the number of bodies they've piled up, and the reason for using these trucks is that the ambulances can't deal with the number of bodies that they are bringing over from the southern part of Israel that borders with Gaza. But also they've told us that inside that building behind me isn't just Israeli soldiers and civilians, there are also Palestinian fighters. They've identified roughly around 100 of them in this building.
Following up on that with Sultan Barakat, you were making the point to me as we were listening to Sarah that driving this is the pain and the outrage caused on both sides by the very high number of civilian casualties.
Yes, and I think it's very regrettable, and it will be very difficult for anyone to condone the killing of civilians in this context. I suspect even for Hamas, as the dust settles, they would be asking themselves the question whether they could have achieved their objectives without actually going into the civilian areas. Would they have been able to hurt Israel simply by capturing the security checkpoints, the security points and the bases that they entered first? Was it really necessary to go into those civilian areas or not?
Do you think there could be a conversation within the ranks of Hamas, Hamas's military wing at some point on did they go too far? You think that conversation might happen?
I think so. I suspect that they were really surprised. I don't think these were predetermined attacks. Particularly the business of the music festival. I mean, they would have never predicted that there will be a music festival at this particular time. The nature of the situation...
They could have known.
Not really. I mean, these people have been cut off from Israel for a long, long time. The last person who would have worked in Israel, lived in Gaza, would have gone back to 2005. You know, this is an area that's totally unknown to the people from inside. And given the limited technology, the access to technology they have, the surveillance equipment and so on, I suspect they were really, really caught into the moment as they broke away from Gaza.
At least 200 bodies were recovered, so they killed at least 200 people who were festival goers.
Yes, I suspect they will be asking hard questions whether this was absolutely necessary or not, and the answer would be not, because they could have really hurt Israel by concentrating on those military bases, which is on its own is a great win for them. The same applies to those who ran out, who broke through the fences. If you recall the early images that came out, only few had guns and were riding motorbikes.
You mean among the Hamas commandos that infiltrated Israel?
Yes, and there were hundreds of young kids who simply were excited about the possibility of breaking through the fence. And I suspect a lot of those that Israel has killed now are those young kids. Time will tell, but they're talking about having killed more than 1,500 Palestinians who have crossed from Gaza. I doubt that Hamas
plenty
had
of
that
other
capability
companies out there
in terms
too
of
that
armed,
did that.
trained individuals.
Sultan, thank you very much. Stand by. We're going to go live to Kimberly Halkett, our White House correspondent in Washington, D.C. Kimberly, am I correct? Do I have this right that the U.S. President Joe Biden will be speaking pretty soon?
Yeah, that's right. We are expecting an imminent speech by the U.S. President, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. military. And we're getting a sense now of what the president might say to the American public and really the world. We know that the president has held or is wrapping up his third phone call with Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu, his third in 4 days, in fact. And he will be talking a little bit about that phone call, once again pledging that the United States stands shoulder to shoulder with the Israeli government. And he will also outline U.S. military and security assistance to Israel and to the Israeli military. We should remind our viewers that there is a standing agreement that the United States provides annually $3.8 billion in security assistance, but we know that Israel has asked for more. We have, according to John Kirby, the national security spokesperson,
when is it going to come to the point where we start telling these motherfuckers, hey, we don't have it?
There will be additional munitions that will be sent, as well as interceptor missiles. So we're maybe going to get a better understanding of what else is being sent. What we do know, though, is that the president will tell the American public no boots on the ground. That means no soldiers, American soldiers, will be going to assist the Israeli forces. Now, we also expect that the U.S. president will be talking about the rise of anti-Semitism inside the United States.
You ain't telling me
the
that,
attacks on
America
who
ain't got fucking
follow the Jewish
guys
faith
over
inside
there?
the U.S.
I say
that
you're
they
full of shit.
should be allowed to worship freely, and he will continue to allow them to and encourage them to do so. So these are some of the things that we expect the U.S. president to say. He said will condemn terrorism in all its forms, and also we expect that he will once again reiterate that the Biden administration's position is for a two-state solution, that that's the best way to resolve the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians.
Kimberly, just a note, by the way, that we're still looking at that live shot over Gaza, and just moments ago we saw what again appeared to be probably rockets fired from Gaza. You would see that arc, that long arc, and then when you see that white flash, that typically means that Israel's Iron Dome system has intercepted the rockets. What can you tell us, Kimberly, about the American aircraft carrier that is being sent to the region, I mean to the Mediterranean? Because you just said no boots on the ground. The U.S. president is going to assure the American public there will be no American boots on the ground. They are still sending what I believe is their biggest aircraft carrier to the region.
We don't need your boots on the ground. We need your money.
Yeah, and that's because there is a grave concern on the part of the U.S. president and his military chiefs at the Pentagon that this is going to escalate into a broader regional conflict. And so, given that concern, there is the positioning of a carrier strike group, as it's called. It's the USS Gerald Ford, and this is being positioned in the Eastern Mediterranean. And the reason for this is because the United States wants to ensure regional stability. It wants to make sure that it can minimize the risk of a wider sort of escalating conflict. And so what we know is that the U.S. president may talk about this in his upcoming speech, but the bottom line is that the United States is there to support its allies. It's there because it has vital national security interests in the region, and it wants to continue to maintain those ties. And so as a result, the U.S. president is there to ensure that those remain intact as this conflict continues. But at the same time, we should tell you that the U.S. president is getting a lot of criticism, particularly on Capitol Hill, from his political adversaries, including the Republicans, who say that the president may have been to blame for a lot of this, especially given the fact that he was encouraging and did participate in a prisoner swap with Iran just last month. In fact, that is the big criticism of the president right now, is that because of the prisoner swap that took place last month, the fact that there were $6 billion in funds returned to Iran, that this, in fact, may have emboldened Hamas, and that support, even though the administration maintains that Iran was not in any way involved, that this has led to this conflict. And so the U.S. president may once again underscore that there was no involvement, something that we've heard repeatedly throughout these recent days. But at the same time, this has certainly been something that the administration has had to defend.
Al Jazeera's White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett, thank you very much for that. It is 9:30 a.m. where you are in Washington, D.C., and it is 7:30 p.m. in the center of our screen as we continue to watch what's happening live over the skies of Gaza. And in the last few moments, again, rockets being intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome system. Now, there have also been explosions on Israel's northern border with Lebanon, where the Israeli military has just launched artillery strikes in response to rocket attacks by Hezbollah. Ali Hashem is in Nakor, southern Lebanon, for us. Ali, first establish the facts as you know them.
We're right now just very close to the Lebanese-Israeli borders. Today there were several incidents on this side of the border. There was a barrage of rockets on several occasions. Around 15 rockets were launched from Lebanon towards Israel. They were intercepted by the Israeli anti-missile system. Israeli army launched also a retaliation, hitting the Lebanese territories with artillery. Now, I don't know if we can see in my background, there are some fires still blazing here.
It's pretty dark, but we can see light in the distance, yes.
Israeli borders on the point. Yeah, so the fire is now close to an Israeli position. Now, the problem is that we can't get closer to the place of the fire. However, this is one of the pictures here of how this area, how Lebanon, the Lebanese side of the border, is becoming an operation area. Tension is escalating day after day, and each day there's something new. There's a new element that's drawing the Lebanese front into this conflict. Now, we can't say that it's directly now in this conflict, but it's playing kind of an adjacent role in this fight, with Hezbollah sending messages to the Israelis, messages regarding the Israeli operation right now in Gaza, that if Israel wants to annihilate Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, then the rules of engagement are going to change. And that's what we saw yesterday with Islamic Jihad group entering or infiltrating into the Israeli borders, engaging with the Israeli army in a battle that left 2 of Islamic Jihad fighters killed. And we heard now that there are 2 Israeli soldiers. Now we heard that. So it seems that the situation is escalating. And the idea of having Palestinian factions fighting from the Lebanese side of the border is kind of new, at least in the current situation. The last time Palestinians were fighting from the Lebanese borders was 1982, and that ended with the Israeli invasion in 1982, when the Palestinians, mainly the PLO, was left Lebanon towards Tunisia, and after that it was mainly Lebanese factions launching attacks from the Lebanese border. So this element is giving, even aside from the whole conflict, the situation in Lebanon and Lebanon's posture in this whole landscape, it's giving it a different picture, whereas there is a new element, which is the Palestinian factions launching attacks from the Lebanese borders, and this is going to overcomplicate the situation. However, also we've heard recently, also today, that there were some rockets launched towards an Israeli tank towards the area of Avivim. We can't confirm that. That's only a news that we heard. We need to confirm it. So the situation is tense, and it's getting day after day more tense.
Ali Hashem, thank you for laying all of that out, showing us also what's behind you. We appreciate that reporting. That's Al Jazeera's Ali Hashem. Sultan Barakat, the Lebanon piece of this, some of our viewers will be very familiar with it. Many of our viewers are going to find this pretty complicated to understand. We're talking about a different part of the country. They are not near Gaza. However, the question is, when you see fighting in Gaza, it raises concerns of whether Hezbollah, that operates out of Lebanon, could perhaps open a second front against Israel.
Yes, well, it is still a possibility, although Hezbollah has its own domestic challenges and calculations. Hezbollah's legitimacy within Lebanon and its position has been really challenged as a result of supporting Assad in its war in Syria. And that has meant that many of the Lebanese are very, very reluctant to see Lebanon drawn into a conflict today. Also, the way Israel traditionally retaliated against Hezbollah, Israel has established a pattern that if there is an attack from Hezbollah, they will try and respond immediately, but also they will target Beirut, and they will go for major infrastructure projects. And I think given the economic situation of the country and the current vacuum in terms of governance and so on, again, people would be very reluctant, and Hezbollah would be under a lot of pressure not to intervene.
So you think barring a major escalation or development, Hezbollah for the moment is going to stay out of this?
Well, this is where I think Netanyahu may play his card. If Netanyahu's objective is to draw Iran into a confrontation with the United States, as soon as this support from the U.S. arrives in the area, Netanyahu may push the buttons of Hezbollah by targeting their positions in the south, using the excuse of whatever al-Jihad is doing randomly at the moment, so that there is a direct involvement. And I think that there is the link between Hezbollah and Iran is a well-established link, and I think that will be the trigger.
Sultan Barakat, thank you very much for that analysis. We want to keep talking about what's happening in Gaza right now, especially for the residents of Gaza. Gaza's been under Israeli blockade for almost 17 years, forcing its people into a humanitarian and economic crisis. So some facts for you to be aware of before we go to our guest. It's one of the most densely populated areas in the world, a narrow strip of land between Israel and Egypt on the Mediterranean Sea. You can see it there, screen left. Gaza is about twice the size of Washington, D.C., but with triple the population. When Hamas took power in 2007 in Gaza, Israel responded by imposing a land, sea, and air blockade, cutting off Gaza from the outside world. Now, there are two crossings for people and goods to enter the territory. One is Beit Hanun, that's between Gaza and Israel. It's known to Israelis as the Erez crossing. And there's the Rafah crossing, which we were talking about earlier. That's between Gaza and Egypt. Rights groups blame regular closures of the crossings for the shortage of goods in Gaza. About two-thirds of Gaza's 2.3 million people are refugees. They live in 8 camps and are highly dependent on UN assistance. And unemployment levels are among the highest in the world. 6 out of 10 young Palestinians in Gaza are out of work. More than half of the population in the Strip suffers from poverty. Gazans live in tight quarters, making them highly vulnerable to attacks, as the footage coming out of the destruction in the Strip has demonstrated, amply demonstrated over the last few days. Now, Jennifer Austin is Deputy Director of the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in Gaza. You're joining us from the enclave. So you work for UNRWA, which is one of the weirder UN acronyms, but that's by the by. I mention it because just regular viewers of Al Jazeera are going to hear UNRWA a lot, and that's the UN agency that deals with the Palestinian refugees. How many schools do you run in the Gaza Strip, and how many people do you currently have sheltering in your facilities?
Thanks, Cyril. Yeah, at the moment, we run 284 schools for 300,000 school children. That's during the normal school terms. But at the moment, those schools have been turned into emergency shelters for refugees who are seeking shelter against this conflict. And at the moment, 88 of our schools are shelters, and we've got 177,000 people seeking refuge for the safety of the blue flag of the UN, looking for safety in our schools.
177,000. Look, I was at this desk at the same hour yesterday, and the number was 137,000. So that's increased
all of
the
innocent civilians that get killed.
Does Israel have the coordinates of all those facilities? And is there communication going on between UNRWA and any Israeli entities, military or otherwise, to say, don't target those spots?
Religion is a hell of a drug.
All of the UN facilities in Gaza, including our schools, are deconflicted, which means that the Israeli authorities have full knowledge and GPS coordinates of all of our facilities. So yes, they're fully aware of those facilities, and they know that we have IDPs, internally displaced persons, in those facilities.
Okay, they're deconflicted. I note the word that you're using. What are you doing for food and water in those facilities?
Well, at the moment, because we are just so stretched, we're already only into day 3 of this unprecedented conflict. We've got huge demands on our supply lines, and of course, you know, supply is cut. So what we're doing is providing the basic food and the basic non-food. We're almost out of non-food items, and we're providing basic food items and that's through our partnership with our UN partner, WFP.
Reminding our viewers
so
that...
those,
sorry, go ahead.
People are getting food, they're getting non-food, yep.
No, I was just going to remind our viewers that Israel has declared a total blockade on Gaza, meaning no food, no water goes in. So how long can you hold out?
Well, that's a good question. We've got supplies for 12 days for food and water for those people. But you know, there's more than those people that are in our schools. There's people sheltering in other places. There's people sheltering with family and friends. So there's many more displaced than are going to UNRWA schools.
Right, Book of Revelation.
12 days of food and water that you have left. You say you have 170,000 people, roughly, closer to 180,000, I believe, people in your facilities. Are people continuing to arrive?
Yes, they're arriving. They're scared. They're coming. They're arriving overnight. It's really difficult for us, Cyril, to get numbers, to get specific numbers until the next day, until we see what's happening, because you know roads are blocked. We don't have Jawar. We don't have telephone lines. Our VHS is down. We've had networks hit by airstrikes. It's not our network, but
well, that's what
it's really difficult for us to know on the ground what's happening out in the areas, and we're relying on our staff, our excellent staff who are going out, who themselves are refugees, and they might have lost their home, they might have themselves been in a shelter, they might have lost family, and they're going out doing their work. They're providing the services for refugees. Cyril, we're providing health services, critical life-saving health. We're providing mental health and social services for the refugees who are in the shelters. We're also providing water well, which is not drinking water, but water well water for in the camps.
Oh yeah,
and
we're
doing what we can for the refugees, but it's really difficult times, and it's really an unprecedented situation that we're facing.
Can any Gazan family come and seek shelter in the UNRWA facilities? Are you turning anyone back?
We don't turn anyone away. On the do no harm principle, we accept anyone. They don't have to be a refugee. They can be a non-refugee, and we will not turn them away from an UNRWA school. All the civilians are welcome in our schools to seek safety under the UN blue flag.
How many more people can you take in?
Well, that's a difficult question. We will have to open more facilities, and we will have to try and care for those people that are in those facilities. But we will be trying to help people to move to other places. We're not alone in this. We're not the only UN actor here. There are other partners. There are NGOs. There are other people who can help. Although, of course, we are the biggest actor. But at the moment, we are scaling up, and we are looking for support to go up to 250,000 in our own shelters.
Right, Princess?
But of course, there are other shelters, there are other actors who can help as well.
And just before I let you go, UNRWA has been through wars, high-intensity wars and periods of bombardment
it's all about the
before.
money.
How does this compare to previous wars?
That person's got more money than me. I need to get more than him.
You know, our own compound here, where I'm calling from, we've been in a bunker for 6 hours yesterday, completely bombarded around us. Our whole infrastructure here is just about down. We are relatively safe here compared to the people of Gaza. This is just and our staff and the people who have been here a long time, they're all saying that this is unlike anything that they've ever seen before. The intensity is just unprecedented. The situation's evolving, it's ongoing, and it could be even going for a long time.
Suzanne.
Jennifer, just a quick
many
recap for our viewers
humans are
who
born
joined us
evil.
mid-interview of what you've told us. You have about 170,000 people, roughly, that are currently across your various UNRWA facilities in the Gaza Strip. You say that you have about 12 days of food and water left. You're not turning anyone away, and any Gazan family or individual can come to your facilities. You're hoping that you'll be able to accommodate more. And those areas are all, in your words, deconflicted, meaning Israel knows where they are and they know not to strike those UNRWA facilities. Jennifer, Austin, thank you very much for sharing all that information with us. Very important for our viewers at this hour.
Thank you, Cyril. Good evening.
Now, the European Parliament is discussing the developments in Israel and Palestine. This comes a day after confusion about whether the EU would suspend aid to Palestinians. The European Commission
So this little video up on the
its
top
earlier
left that just
that it would
kind of
stop
explains
payments after several member states protested.
the Iron
James
Dome
Moran is a
and,
former EU, I beg your pardon,
how it
EU
was working
ambassador
in the
to
beginning.
Egypt, Jordan, and Yemen. I spoke to him earlier. He says that there are long-standing protections on how
the one
the
in the
European
bottom right
aid
is a live
spent.
feed.
I think
The
that
one
there
we're
have
listening
been
to, the
very
big one in
strong
the upper
safeguards in
top,
place
that's
for
a
many years
live
now
feed.
about how EU aid is administered and
The one on the bottom middle is a live feed.
Palestine, whether it be
And
in
I'm
the
not
West
sure.
Bank or
I
whether
think
it
the
be
one on the
in
bottom
Gaza
left is
when
a
it
live
comes to
feed as
development
well.
aid and so on. There are firewalls and
I
any
think it's
number
just
of
the upper left-hand
restrictions
corner
on
is
the disbursement of
a
that aid.
video
And
kind of
those are in
explaining
place.
the Iron Dome.
Whether or
and
not new restrictions are
works.
required, well, we'll see. But for the time being, I think it's pretty clear that
Oh, they definitely want a one world
the
government
EU aid that is
pole vote.
provided goes
Definitely want
primarily
the
through
new world
Palestinian
order.
Authority
It's all
for
part
the
of
benefit
the
of
plan.
Palestinian people in Palestine.
Iran's supreme leader has denied any involvement in the Hamas attacks on Israel, but he told an audience at a military academy that Tehran supports and defends Palestine and its resistance.
Supporters of the regime and some officials of the occupying regime have said some nonsense comments over the past few days. They introduced Iran as the one who is behind this operation. They made a mistake. We, of course, defend Palestinians. We kiss the forehead and arms of the brave fighters and youth of Palestine. Yes, it's true. But those who say that non-Palestinians were behind what was done, they do not know Palestinians well. They have underestimated the nation of Palestine. That is their mistake.
Al Jazeera's Dorsa Jabari reports on this from Tehran.
Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is the commander-in-chief
Hey, Terry,
of
good to
Iran's
see you,
armed
my friend.
forces.
Hope you've been
and
doing
he has
well,
the
bro.
final say on all matters when it comes to this country's military capabilities and actions. This is
You have a good day too,
really
Princess.
significant because it shows that the Supreme Leader felt it was time to address the accusations being hurled at his country and to put to rest any suspicion the foreign countries may have about Iran's direct involvement, and also to deter Israel from using it as a pretext to launch any attacks against Iran. The Supreme Leader also took the opportunity to issue a warning to officials in Israel, saying that they have now changed the narrative from being the oppressors to claiming to be the oppressed, basically painting themselves as a victim to justify the actions that they're taking against the civilian population in Gaza. And he said that that could have a harsh blow to them as well. So this certainly is not over yet. And the Supreme Leader here highlighting the fact that Iran will continue to stand with the Palestinian people and their cause.
I want to talk about Iran with you, Sultan. You've been with us throughout the hour. You've heard everything our correspondents had to say and reported, as well as our guests. Iran is a major part of this. You were saying earlier, and you were also made this point yesterday, you think Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, to be specific, may want to expand this war,
Blue.
use this as an opportunity. Tell me if I'm explaining this right. According to you, to enter into war with Iran.
To enter the United States into war with Iran.
To drag the U.S. into a war with Iran. But that still involves...
I don't think he will ever go to war with Iran.
Involves a war
like
with
he never
Iran.
did with Iraq. He dragged the United States into that. But you see, Iran is an obsession in the United States. And it's a very, very soft spot. If you link any action to Iran or to, as he did to 9/11, Iran and Daesh, he took the three areas where the United States already is worked up about. Then you have their unquestionable support, and I think this is what he's playing on. There is no
Mr. Back,
doubt
good to
that
see you, bro.
the link between Hezbollah and Iran is established, and their direct support and so on. Between Hamas and Iran, also there is no doubt that there has been some support to Hamas over the years, and I think Hamas will not deny that they have received support in the absence of support from the Arab states, which dried up. Not just during the normalization, but even earlier.
There you go, Paul. Taylor Swift is straight up evil. She's probably the one that caused all this shit.
The invasion of Kuwait. A lot of support that used to come traditionally to the Palestinians and to Hamas in particular has dried up. So, but in this particular incident,
Taylor Swift is the Hat Man.
Are saying themselves, they had no hand in it directly.
And by the way, the U.S. have said that there's no direct evidence linking them to the attack.
Of course they would, because Biden and his administration, they would want to distance themselves as much as possible from this argument because of the exchange of prisoners that took place a few weeks ago, and the transition of some of the Iranian-held money to a Qatari bank here to try and to go back ultimately to the Iranians. So it is in his interest not to establish any direct link. I personally don't think there is a direct link, because the timing, as you could see, was really an opportune time that the Palestinians have worked out for themselves based on this extreme government coming into position on the Israeli side, the way they've shifted their forces to protect the settlements in the north, the fact that there's been a festive holidays and so on. So these are issues I think the Palestinians would measure much better than the Iranians and take a decision over.
All right, Sultan Barakat, thank you very much for joining us all hour. Now, we are going to recap things before we take a quick break.
You are getting paid to actually do some work, Pole Vault, not sit around on YouTube hanging out with your buddies.
We started reporting from pretty much everywhere in Israel. We've seen multiple strikes, incoming and outgoing. Now, Israel has announced a complete siege of Gaza, cutting off water, food, fuel, and electricity supplies. Israel's bombing of the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt leaves Palestinians waiting at the border. The World Health Organization is calling for a humanitarian corridor to allow urgently needed medical aid into the enclave. I'm going to leave you with pictures coming out of Gaza and Israel over the past few days. And I'll be back in a moment at the top of the hour with continuing coverage of the Israeli-Gaza war on Al Jazeera. Do stay with us.
He'll be back in 2 minutes. So the 3 feeds on the bottom are all live feeds. The big one in the upper top, in the top, is a live feed, and the one in the upper left is just a video kind of talking about the Iron Dome and using the Iron Dome. Hey, Hoot Owl Holler, good to see you.
Expo 2023, Doha. A world of fascination, where science meets nature.
What the fuck is this?
A world of joy, where millions will be entertained, and where you will savor every moment of the present, while celebrating the future. Join us, and let's discover a better world. Expo 2023, Doha.
God damn, I want to go. That looked cool.
Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani International Anti-Corruption Excellence Award. Nominate your hero now.
The Geneva International Motor Show is coming to Qatar. Discover more at jimsqa.com.
As the conflict between Gaza and Israel escalates, Al Jazeera's correspondents are on the ground.
I'm in occupied
reach Jerusalem.
Armed men have crossed onto the other side of the border.
This is happening right now in Tel Aviv. This was a business.
Israeli forces declaring a state, what they call, of war.
Air raids are shaking the Gaza Strip in different areas.
Stay with us for the latest developments on Al Jazeera.
Scenes of devastation in Gaza as Israeli airstrikes hit the port. At least 830 Palestinians have been killed in the bombardment since Saturday. I'm Cyril Vanier. It's good to have you with us. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha. Also coming up, Hamas launches hundreds of rockets towards the Israeli city of Ashkelon. It says it's in response to Israel's continued pounding of Gaza. Israel shells Lebanon after rocket fire from Hezbollah fighters. We'll have the latest from the border in southern Lebanon. And the Israeli army is still recovering bodies in the aftermath of the Hamas attack on Saturday. At least 900 Israelis have been killed. So we begin in Gaza, where the Israeli military is continuing its bombardment for a fourth day. At least 830 Palestinians have been killed, while at least 900 Israelis have been killed since Hamas launched an attack on Saturday. Air and artillery strikes on Gaza have pounded the strip from north to south, targeting the port within the last few hours. The pictures there. There are growing concerns about the humanitarian situation. Israel has imposed a total siege of the Gaza Strip, cutting off all supplies of food, water, and fuel. Rasul Sardar reports.
Building after building, block after block. All are now leveled. Many people inside, including children and the elderly, did not have time to escape. By midday on Tuesday, Israel had bombed nearly 2,000 locations in the densely populated Gaza Strip and promised to intensify its assault, leaving the 2.3 million Palestinians living there with nowhere to go.
The Israeli army made a phone call to a person who wasn't here. He was in Al Rimal. We came running and they told one of our neighbors that the building has to be evacuated. Where should they go? They said they can go to the sea. People started running and suddenly we heard an explosion. My brother's 2 children were standing in the doorway. They were killed.
On Monday, the Israeli defense minister announced a complete siege of the Gaza Strip, cutting off supplies of electricity, fuel, food, and water. The unrelenting bombardment of homes, communication towers, hospitals, roads, and mosques has become a daily occurrence.
Our area, Al Ramal, is a quiet area, but when I came here I didn't recognize it. It's completely destroyed. All its features have changed. This is unfair. This is terrorism. There is no humanity. Families here live in peace and do not have any links to anything. What happened was revenge, a crime.
People are searching for survivors under the rubble. Nowhere is safe, and there is nowhere to go, they say.
We are told to evacuate the eastern part of Khan Yunis and go to a safe place, but there is no safe place in the Gaza Strip.
This hospital in Rafah is understaffed and under-equipped, and the number of people arriving here needing treatment keeps growing. Some of these children's parents have died. Many don't know yet how much they have lost.
Now there's a real massacre being committed against innocent civilians in the Sabra area. There are dozens of victims, and ambulances and civilian vehicles are still evacuating the victims from this house that was directly targeted.
Journalists reporting on the front lines of this war have also become targets. They, like many of Gaza's faces, are now gone forever. The Israeli airstrikes have already killed hundreds of people and injured thousands. But people in Gaza fear the worst is still to come. Rasul Sardar, Al Jazeera.
All right, we're looking at the live pictures of the skies over Gaza, where it is 8 p.m. GMT. We're in day 4 of this war, and Israel has been conducting what it has described as the most intense and severe bombardment that it has ever carried out in Gaza. Let's go to Al Jazeera's Hoda Abdelhamid in West Jerusalem. Hoda, bring us up to speed on the immediate politics of this for Benjamin Netanyahu, because he has been involved in political negotiations to try and broaden his political support and his political cover, I think we can describe it as, over the last 48 hours.
Well, it seems that there is some progress being made. We just had in the last 10 minutes or so an announcement that at 18:30 GMT, so in about an hour and a half, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will meet with his political opponent Benny Gantz. That will be a meeting just between the two. And according to a Likud member, which is the party of Prime Minister Netanyahu, there seems to be some progress made, even though we don't have more details about that. Now, earlier in the day, the Prime Minister had received a green light from his coalition members to go ahead with this emergency government, trying to form it. But we also heard from Benny Gantz several times that he was opposing to form a government with the Prime Minister because of certain members of his coalition. So we don't know where that is at this point. We don't know if Benny Gantz will find a compromise and accept that those members of the government that he's against, meaning the far-right members of the government, would actually be part of this emergency cabinet whenever it will be formed. So this is something we will be following throughout the night. I think that would be a meeting that would probably last a few hours, but we'll update you with what's happening there.
Ultimately, Hoda, what is this going to change? Because military planning is already underway.
Well, it's going to change, I think, the fact that Israel needs to show that it stands united. Prime Minister Netanyahu also needs to show that he has the full support of the entire government, of the entire country, simply because there's a backdrop to that. You have to go back over the last 4 years. There have been 5 elections in this country. For 38 weeks straight, you had weekly protests against the coalition government of Prime Minister Netanyahu. This has been a country that is bitterly divided. But one thing that always happens in Israel is that in times of crisis, the Israelis do stand united. So Benjamin Netanyahu needs that, because he also had some reservists that before all this happened were against him, had publicly spoken against him and against the judicial overhaul that happened here. So he needs that, and he probably also needs that for after the dust settles. Once all of this will go, he knows he's going to be facing tough questions, not only from the members of the Knesset, but also from the wider Israeli public wanting to know how all this happened. So whatever decision he's going to take in the coming days and weeks, having the support or having with him Benny Gantz, who at the end of the day is also a former chief of staff, a former minister of defense. He was the one in charge during the Gaza war back in 2014. Having him would sort of take off some of the pressure that is on Benjamin Netanyahu, because ask anyone here at the moment, people tell you that after all this ends, well, Benjamin Netanyahu is in a tough spot and maybe will not be able to keep on with his premiership. So certainly there are many layers to all of these decisions, but I think Israel at the moment also wants to show that it stands united in this crisis.
Hoda, thank you very much. And you mentioned those negotiations will be lasting possibly quite a while, perhaps into the night. You'll keep us updated with developments. Thanks, Hoda. Now, we can go live to Tariq Abu Azum, who is live for us inside the Gaza Strip. Tariq, we've seen multiple strikes across Gaza in the last few hours. We also saw I want to say about 2 hours ago, a strike on boats in the Gaza harbor, or they were docked at the port. Do you know what that was and why?
Well, the Israeli Air Forces had struck a boat offshore the Gaza Strip. This boat is located in the center of the Gaza harbor. Generally, this boat was targeted. There is no any clear reason for the purpose of this targeting, but it might be for to prevent any attempt to infiltrate to the Israeli settlement as well. But to this current moment, as night comes, generally the situation in the Gaza Strip is relatively calm, except like during the last hour, the Palestinian militant group here inside the Gaza Strip fired dozens of rockets towards the Israeli cities in retaliation to the Israeli attacks on the besieged enclave.
It's day 4 of this war. How are the residents in Gaza coping, especially bearing in mind that Israel announced yesterday a total blockade of the Gaza Strip? That means no food, no water, no fuel, no electricity going into Gaza.
Despite the Israeli closure inside the Gaza Strip, Israel has shuttered all crossing borders, preventing the entry of different food and humanitarian necessities for the Gazans. Now, the majority of them now, they are consuming and using every possible materials afforded in the Gaza Strip to survive. And we can say that the numbers of displaced citizens from the eastern borders and from the areas that had been threatened to be destroyed has increased as well. Now, the majority of those people, even they went to the shelters inside the schools affiliated to the United Nations, or even the majority of them, they just moved forward to the central areas inside the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, these areas were heavily bombarded during the last couple of hours.
All right, Tariq Abouazoum reporting live for us inside the Gaza Strip. Thank you very much. The Israeli army says that its soldiers are now in full control of all communities along the border with Gaza. Bodies are being recovered in several kibbutz that are close to the border after Hamas's attack on Saturday morning. Sarah Khairat is in Ramla, where families have gathered to identify the bodies of those killed in the attack.
We've actually just seen what we think is a senior cabinet minister go past in blacked out cars. We've also seen some senior Israeli military officials. They've arrived to this building just behind me. I'm going to step out. This building here is effectively the army building where they deal with casualties from the police or military personnel. Of course, because the system has been so overwhelmed for the one that deals with civilians in Tel Aviv, this has become their central command building for this. In fact, you might just see that building over there with flashing lights. That seems to be a senior minister. We're not quite sure who that is yet, but there's a lot of movement coming in and out of this building. We've been seeing ambulances turning up in large numbers. We've also, we counted about 7 to 8 of those in about 40 minutes of us first arriving here. We've also seen, if you see just in that distance there, a tent that's been set up. And that tent is for family members that are coming here to see if anyone they have lost is on a list that's been put together for those that have been identified, Israeli bodies that are inside a mortuary inside this building here. We've also been seeing a lot of trucks that have been coming in, big articulated trucks with bodies. We spoke to someone who's been an official person that's told us that the number of bodies they're piled up, and the reason for using these trucks is that the ambulances can't deal with the number of bodies that they are bringing over from the southern part of Israel that borders with Gaza. But also they've told us that inside that building behind me isn't just Israeli soldiers and civilians, there are also Palestinian fighters. They've identified roughly around 100 of them in this building.
I want to go straight to Al Jazeera's Ali Hashem now. You're at the in the border area, the Lebanon-Israel border, and there have been explosions in the border area. The Israeli military has launched artillery strikes in response to rocket attacks by Hezbollah, Ali.
Yes, Cyril, there are a series of events that took place on the Lebanese side of the border. First of all, as you said, Hezbollah, or we still need to know who, launched a barrage of rockets on several occasions. There were around 10, 15 rockets that were launched. Israeli anti-missile system intercepted the rockets. Then Israeli artillery started hitting the area of the Lebanese Israeli borders, and there was a huge fire. Now it's a bit off. However, just a minute ago, Hezbollah issued a statement saying that its fighters targeted an Israeli military vehicle near the settlement of Avivim, and that they destroyed it with guided missiles. And that's in response to an Israeli attack on one of its own positions here in Lebanon. So we have a group of elements happening on the Lebanese side of the border. The operation zone right now here is taking more and more zeal. However, it's not a war zone yet, but the amount of events happening on daily basis since the 8th of October till this moment puts Lebanon on the map of this conflict. Maybe a side element. However, it's getting into this conflict closer and closer, and getting a wider space of coverage given these elements on daily basis.
Yeah, Ali, stay with me. I want to explain to viewers, first of all, what we're seeing and how these things are all interconnected. In the center of our screen is the nighttime shot, live shot of the skies over Gaza. In the last minute or so, as Ali was speaking, you saw what was an Israeli strike on Gaza as Israel carries out what it described as its most intense bombardment of Gaza ever. That's happening in the south of Israel, along the border with Egypt. Now, in the north of Israel, along the border with Lebanon, that's where Ali is. That's what he's talking about, because there have been skirmishes, because there has been a back and forth of rocket fire, and because on the other side of that border, where you are, in Lebanon, there is, of course, Hezbollah that is operating. And the question that is raised each time we see a war in Gaza is a second front now going to be opened, possibly, between Israel and Hezbollah? So that's the question I want to ask you now. Does Hezbollah have any intention of joining this war, as per their latest statements?
Well, it's clear that Hezbollah is trying to deal with this situation on a day-to-day basis. We don't have any information about their strategy. But at the beginning, they did this operation in the Sheba farms that's regarded by the Lebanese government as a Lebanese territory. So if Hezbollah is to defend its operation there, it would be saying, and it said in a statement, that it's liberating, it's doing an effort to liberate Lebanese land. However, the second day we saw a Palestinian group, Islamic Jihad, infiltrating and engaging with the Israeli army in a battle on the other side of the border, and then Israel launching strikes on the Lebanese side of the border, mainly on Hezbollah positions, killing 3 of Hezbollah's fighters. Today we were at one of the funerals here in southern Lebanon in Hanawai, and it was clear that Hezbollah supporters were calling on the leadership to take revenge for the fighters who were killed. And today, as you saw, there was this attack. Now, let me just continue with the same context. Yesterday, in retaliation to killing of the 3 fighters, Hezbollah hit a couple of Israeli barracks in Avivim and Branit. So Hezbollah said that this is in retaliation to the killing of its own. This is an initial retaliation to the killing of its own fighters. Just to make it short, Hezbollah is trying from its own side to maybe engage in this situation. What we understand is that they are using this fire messaging, and Israel is also using the fire messaging. Hezbollah is trying to say, you have to contain this conflict, telling Israel, while the Israelis are telling Hezbollah that in case there is any attacks happening from the Lebanese territories, then you are going to be responsible. And that's why they are hitting Hezbollah's positions directly.
All right, Ali, you're in Nakura. We appreciate you walking us through all of that. It is complicated. I want to just take a moment to acknowledge the live scenes coming out of Gaza right now. Let's listen in. In the last minute or two, as Ali was speaking, our viewers will have witnessed multiple Israeli raids, whether they were naval raids, air raids, artillery raids, unclear, on targets within the Gaza Strip. You'll see that telltale flash of light and now the plume of smoke, if you can make it out, over the Gaza skyline. It's just before 8:30 local time in Gaza, and this is the scene live. Now, Palestinians outside of Gaza have not been spared the consequences of Israel's crackdown in response to the crisis. Israel has blocked travel routes inside the occupied West Bank. Imran Khan has this report from Ramallah.
Okay, I'm going back. I'm going back. Avanti. אתה אמרת לי
up, behind that,
The occupied West Bank is now not only occupied, it's effectively blockaded. The Israeli army has turned it into an archipelago of separation. You can't leave your home to go visit family or friends in a neighboring area. 3.2 million Palestinians are simply stuck.
I left 10 minutes ago. I am sick, but they're not letting me in. This is worse than when we used mules to move around in the old days. Now we can't even get anywhere with cars.
Israeli forces have also severely restricted the border with Jordan, the only crossing point for Palestinians who want to travel abroad, leaving thousands stranded. Suhail Khalaliya is the head of settlement monitoring at the Applied Research Institute, Jerusalem. He specializes in Israel's system of checkpoints and restrictions on Palestinians.
The West Bank is surrounded by hundreds of checkpoints, at the border with Egypt, at the Green Line, or within the West Bank. These new restrictions have turned the West Bank into small prisons, and the occupier controls all entries and exits.
This is the DCO checkpoint just north of Ramallah. It divides Palestinian territory. Now, the Israelis make it very difficult for Palestinians to normally cross this checkpoint, but now it's impossible. They've just shut it down completely. In the Palestinian town of Huwara, this road that runs through it cannot be used by Palestinians. Sometimes the Israelis make exceptions for medical or family emergencies, but even that small concession has now gone. If you're Palestinian and you visited a neighbouring area on Saturday, you're now stuck there. Many here feel this effective blockade may not be temporary, that it's simply a precursor to even heavier Israeli restrictions that may well become permanent. Imran Khan, Al Jazeera, Ramallah, the occupied West Bank.
That's some fucking crazy shit.
All right, we continue to watch the scenes, the live footage, the skies over Gaza, where moments ago we saw some large-scale attacks on targets within Gaza. Now, to some of the political repercussions outside of Israel and Gaza, the European Parliament is discussing the developments in Israel and Palestine. It comes a day after confusion about whether the bloc would suspend aid to Palestinians. The European Commission appeared to backtrack on its announcement that it would stop payments after several member states protested. James Moran is a former EU ambassador to Egypt, Jordan, and Yemen, and he says that there are long-standing protections on how aid to Palestinians is spent.
I think that there have been very strong safeguards in place for many years now about how EU aid is administered and spent in Palestine, whether it be in the West Bank or whether it be in Gaza when it comes to development aid and so on. There are firewalls and any number of restrictions on the disbursement of that aid, and those are in place. Whether or not new restrictions are required, well, we'll see. But for the time being, I think it's pretty clear that the EU aid that is provided goes primarily through the Palestinian Authority for the benefit of Palestinian people in Palestine.
U.S. President Joe Biden is expected to speak about the situation in Israel and Gaza within the next hour. He was supposed to speak this hour. We're still watching the live shot of that podium. Al Jazeera's Kimberly Halkett joins us. You're our White House correspondent. Joe Biden perhaps characteristically late, I think it's fair to say.
Characteristically late, but at least we have a reason why this time. And what we know is that the U.S. president was holding a call with the Israeli leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, which we knew. But I guess that call went on a little longer than we anticipated. And as a result, that delayed this speech to the American public. We know that that call, in fact, included the Vice President, Kamala Harris, as well. So we are anticipating that speech that was expected to happen at 17 GMT will now take place sometime closer to 18 GMT or thereafter. What we expect the president to say is that once again, the United States will stand shoulder to shoulder with the Israeli government in terms of really condemning what the United States calls evil acts. In other words, the Hamas attack on Israel, and that the United States opposes what it calls terrorism in all forms. Now, we should point out when it comes to the phone call that took place, this is the third call that Joe Biden's had with Netanyahu in 4 days. And we should also point out that what we expect they were talking about and what we'll hear from the president is really an outline of the military assistance that the United States is expected to provide Israel, because the position of the United States is that Israel has a right to defend itself. And that's something that we've heard repeatedly. We do know from speaking to the national security spokesperson, John Kirby, that there is going to be additional security assistance provided in the form of munitions as well as interceptor missiles. And we also know that the U.S. president is expected to say no boots on the ground. That means no U.S. soldiers. So once again, we're watching closely for that speech that will be happening in the next hour.
Kimberly, can I ask you how this is playing out?
I got the podium set up
the
there in
US?
the bottom middle. When
how
he
Biden
comes on
has
to
handled
talk, I'll
this so
blow
far?
up that picture so we can listen to it.
Well, in terms of his critics on Capitol Hill, they are almost near unanimous in their criticism of him, namely Republicans, the conservatives, who feel that the mishandling, they call it, of Joe Biden politically has led to this. What they say is that they believe that Iran, even though the administration says was not involved in this, really helped to finance Hamas in the planning of this attack. That the prisoner exchange that took place between the United States and Iran last month, that this is what allowed for the financing of that. But when it comes to the Democrats, they believe that there is a division amongst Democrats when it comes to this issue.
Kimberly, thank you so much. I squeezed in a cheeky extra question that we didn't really have time for. We're going to break. We're back at the top of the hour with more news on Al Jazeera. Do stay tuned.
I don't want to listen to commercials. What you're hearing now is the bottom middle, waiting for the president to come and
Not
talk.
exactly. We're already here. All right, thank you guys. We're just doing it.
You got that right, Lynn. You are 100% correct on that, my friend. I don't want to hear a bunch of reporters talk. I don't think this one here is in English.
نوعا ما عن غزة، ولكن هناك أيضا حراك سياسي كبير جمال في لبنان. اليوم شاهدنا
So the bottom right is 4 different pictures. The 2 upper pictures is the Gaza Strip. The bottom left is Ashdod, and the bottom right is Tel Aviv. So that's the live feed for the bottom right. Bottom middle, we're waiting for old Joe to come and say whatever the fuck he's gonna say. The bottom left is a live feed, and I have no idea what they're talking about because I don't speak the language. Upper left is just a video that talks about the Iron Curtain, or whatever the fuck it's called. And this big one in the upper middle, that's what we're listening to.
People living in terror under the most intense bombing campaign Israel has ever launched against one of the world's most densely populated areas. Meanwhile, more bodies are being recovered in southern Israel after Hamas fighters attacked an all-night party. Israeli settlements and a kibbutz were targeted. Israel has announced a complete blockade of Gaza, meaning its 2.3 million people face a humanitarian catastrophe, perhaps worse than before. Years of Israeli occupation and siege have left more than half the population in poverty, lacking essential goods, and dependent on aid. Israel's defense minister, a member of the mainstream Likud party and not its far-right coalition partners, described the siege strategy, referring to the Palestinians they're fighting as animals.
The link I just put into chat is the link to
I have ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip. There's no electricity, no food, no
to
water,
this bottom
no
middle,
fuel. Complete closure.
Stream.
We're fighting human animals.
People are
and we act
talking so
accordingly.
much trash in there.
The impact on Gazans of such attitudes from mainstream Harvard-educated Israeli politicians is death, injury and deprivation. Our reporter Jamila Abu Zannuna is in Gaza City. She sent us some insight into what life is like there now.
Today marks the 4th day of the Israel-Gaza war that has started Saturday morning after the infiltration of the Palestinian military groups into the Israeli settlements. As a retaliation, the Israeli army has launched many raids on the Gaza Strip, on residential houses, towers and mosques as well. It has also resulted in the death of many people, hundreds of people, thousands of casualties and thousands of displaced people into the hospitals and UNRWA schools, as there has been no safe place in Gaza anymore. There also has been a cut in power, fuel, water and food. This leaves us with a complete siege with no anticipations of what's going to happen in the next couple of days or hours, as we have been witnessing right now many ambulances reaching Al Shifa Hospital with tens of people from the south of Gaza. Jamila Abu Zannuna, Gaza inside.
Okay, I gotta pause her for a minute. Did you notice she's wearing this fucking helmet and this big flak jacket, but every single person behind her is just walking around with no jackets, t-shirts and Levi's?
Areas in the world, a narrow strip of land between Israel and Egypt, about twice the size of Washington, D.C., but with triple the population. About 2/3 of Gaza's 2.3 million residents are refugees. They live in 8 camps and are dependent on UN assistance. Palestinians in the besieged enclave live in cramped conditions, in tight quarters, making them vulnerable to Israeli strikes.
See that on the bottom left? Bottom left, that's a.
Well, let's bring our guests into the show. We have joining us from Tunis, Francesca Albanese, United Nations Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territory. In Haifa, Israel, is Diana Bhutto, a lawyer and former spokeswoman for the Palestine Liberation Organization. And in Tel Aviv, Gideon Levy, a columnist at the Israeli newspaper Haaretz and the author of The Punishment of Gaza. Well, a warm welcome to you all. If I could start with Diana. You know, Diana, how common, I was thinking, how rare is it in modern political discourse to hear a government minister openly vowing to starve a population of food, water, electricity and fuel?
Well, actually, this isn't at all new for Israel.
This is a live feed here.
The siege
These
that Israel is now
explosions.
tightening has actually been in place now for 17 years. And actually much longer than that if you look at the system of closure. The problem, of course, is that Israelis have gotten used to this process of dehumanizing Palestinians. We heard as much yesterday when he called Palestinians human animals. And the fact that he gets to do so with complete impunity, it's this that has led to the events of this past week, that somehow they believe that they can do whatever they want to Palestinians and that history only began on Saturday, discounting 56 years of military occupation, discounting 56 years of what they saw over the course of the past 48 hours being meted out against Palestinians for 56 years. So it's not
Diana,
at all
if I could jump in, something has changed though, right? This was a territory, obviously. Gaza has been under siege for 56 years, according to international law. It had, under occupation for 56 years. It has been under siege for 16 years. But now what Israeli officials are talking about is total siege and restricting, not just restricting, stopping completely the flow of very basic vitals of life.
Yes, absolutely. And so what they're now gearing up to, I want to put it in its context so that people understand this is not new, but they are intensifying it. And the whole point is that what they want to do is commit mass atrocities. And sadly, they're being given the green light by the United States and by other countries around the world.
Let me move to Francesca and ask this question. The obvious one that comes to mind, Francesca, is how does this sit with international law?
It doesn't. It's completely outside what is permitted under international law. And this is, in fact, it sounds like a broken record, but this is the trajectory that I have been following in my observations and documentations of the reality on the ground, and my predecessors as well. Let me add something on this blockade of the blockade, though. What it's leading to, it's starvation, which is a crimes against humanity under international law, and it will be criminally. It should be criminally prosecuted. Because
Francesca, let me jump in and present
you got
to
that
you
right, Huda.
perhaps the
banks
Israeli
are making
perspective,
tons of
at
money.
least of those who support
them 6 or 8 people at the top of the food
Does
chain. They're
witnessing
making,
crimes
just raking in
that
billions
took place
right now.
in killing Israeli civilians at all sit with the right to, quote unquote, as they put it, self-defense, that we are defending ourselves and we have a legal right to defend ourselves by imposing this complete siege, starving the population of food, water, electricity and fuel. Can that be justified under international law?
Self-determination, no, because self-defense of a state is not a basis for justifying actions that constitute crimes or other serious violations of international law, especially in the context of hostilities. So this is the reality. There are limits, and in the cycle of every attack, the principles of distinction, precaution, and proportionality must be taken, not just during the entire operation. Per each attack, civilians cannot be targeted and civilian infrastructure cannot be targeted, which is not what is happening, and it is not what has happened in the previous 5 wars that Israel has launched against Gaza since 2008.
Okay, let me bring Gideon into the discussion. And Gideon, obviously, I know that you do not subscribe to the far-right wing of Israeli politics, but from your understanding of the Israeli body politic that's in power right now, what do you think is the strategic thinking, the strategic goal of saying we're going to stop all food, water, electricity and fuel going into Gaza? To achieve what?
Let me correct you. When it comes to Gaza, when it comes to the apartheid, when it comes to the occupied territories, to the occupation, the differences between the far right wing and the so-called central left are minor, if at all. So before we get into your question, let's not label it on the right-wing government, because I guess a center-left government would react right now in the position, in this context that we are now, a center-left government would have reacted exactly the same, including this total siege. This total siege is not what worries me, because this total siege cannot last for long. The problem
Why
is
can't
the
it last,
ongoing...
Gideon? Why can't it last?
Because in a certain stage, people will start starve in Gaza, and Israel will not stand scenes of starvation, and the world then will say a word about opening a humanitarian corridor and having some humanitarian ceasefire. This is not the problem. The problem is 17 years of a not total a siege in which we all normalized it. The total siege will not be normalized, but the ongoing siege is totally normalized by Israel, by the international community, by everyone. And then everyone is so astonished and shocked when the Palestinians are taking very brutal, I would even say barbarian measures to put an end to it.
Okay, I want to go back to Diana. Diana, when we put this statement by the Israeli Minister of Defense about cutting off all food, fuel, water to Gaza, alongside, in the context of what the Israeli Prime Minister has been talking about taking action that will change the Middle East, telling Palestinians to get out of Gaza, do you start to have some concern about whether there is Israeli thinking here about demographic change in Gaza is on the table?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. And people are now calling for a second Nakba, a second mass expulsion of Palestinians, a second ethnic cleansing. And this is where we're gearing up. Look, it's not that far of a stretch when you hear the statements that have been ongoing, not just over the course of the past few days, but that have been ongoing now for decades by this prime minister and by other Israeli officials, in which they say that it's time to get rid of Palestinians, that they have to finish the job of 1948. When you hear that, you juxtapose it with the statements by Yoav Gallant, who just came out yesterday calling us human animals, and juxtapose it with the statement by Netanyahu saying that people should leave even though there's no place for them to go because they've closed off the Gaza Strip. What we're really gearing up to see is mass atrocities.
How do you think you can just tell a race of people
Let me jump in as well and put you
to leave, go. We don't like you anymore, just leave.
They are making targeted strikes, they say, on Hamas quarters, military installations in Gaza. This is not mass targeting of the civilian population.
That's impossible.
And this whole war really comes down to like Jews and Palestine, right?
Hamas
Palestinians.
equals Gaza, and so that any strike on Gaza to them is a justification for targeting Hamas. And we know that that is not the case. About 50% of the population of the Gaza Strip is under the age of 18. They've lived their entire lives only knowing the siege. They haven't had water. They haven't been secure. They've lived through 5 wars, and yet they have no future. And yet the world still continues to behave as though it's business as usual. And as Gideon said, the siege, the blockade has become totally normalized. The suffering of Palestinians has become totally normalized. The dehumanization of Palestinians has reached peak levels, such that we're not allowed to even respond back to what Israel has done to us for 56 years.
All right, let me bring Gideon back into this. Can the Israeli government change the Middle East, as Netanyahu was vowing, without launching a very serious ground offensive? Is that really ultimately what we're looking at?
I'm sure that you are not asking this seriously because it's ridiculous. Because Israel is using the same threats and the same methods that it used so many times and failed to reach anything so many times. I'm ready to put aside the moral question. I'm ready to put aside the legal question. But where does it lead to? I mean, you asked before about the strategic goal. The only strategic goal that Israelis can have in mind is getting rid of the Palestinians in one way or the other. But this is not a realistic goal.
Do you think that's what some policymakers, at least in Israel, are really contemplating right now, at least in terms of Gaza, that they can really, if not get rid, but shift the Palestinian population somehow in Gaza, away from the border?
Why would we guess if people, including ministers, said it clearly? When they say about total bombarding of Gaza, what will remain in Gaza after it will be totally bombarded?
Perhaps, Francesca,
beachfront
for
property.
those who might not survive this, right? Listening to what the WHO said only a matter of hours ago about how all the medicine, the medical supplies that they have pre-positioned have already run out. What kind of humanitarian situation are we heading to, and how quickly will it emerge if people don't have some of the basics like medicine, food, fuel, or even water, as the Israeli defense minister was vowing to cut off to Gaza?
And definitely the risks are immense, and therefore also the concern. We are not talking of a normal situation that all of a sudden is cut off from the rest of the world. Gaza was already severely depleted and compromised before the 7th of October. And again, I share Diana and Gideon's dismay at the normalization of this situation and at the poor action, because the blockade in itself constitutes already a war crime, a form of collective punishment. And what is going to happen next? Without essential supplies, food, medicines, and water or electricity, people are going to die, and the wounded will not be able. The hospitals will not be able to cure the wounded, and there will be diseases spreading. Already, people from Gaza are fearing cholera, which will happen with all the destruction of civilian infrastructure and impossibility to cure the wounded.
Diana, if we look closer at the politics of this, how have we reached this point in terms of complete failure of the political process and the political systems?
Through a number of ways. The first is that there was a lot of emphasis on negotiations and somehow two-state solution, rather than focusing on the problem, which is military occupation and the denial of freedom and the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. That's one. But then beyond that, it's that there has never been in place a system of accountability regarding Israel's actions. Israel's never been held to account. My friend, your colleague, Shireen Abu Akleh, is just one example. She was assassinated on May the 11th of last year, and to date, nobody has been held to account for that. And there are thousands of Syrians that are out there where Israel has never been held to account. So in the mindset of Israelis, this just becomes a system in which they can do whatever it is that they want to do. And
let me jump in, Diana. You're right. A lot of international organizations have documented killings of what they consider to be extrajudicial killings of not only journalists and civil society workers, but other Palestinians or members of the Palestinian population. And they say very clearly there's a lack of accountability. Let me present to you, though, the Israeli narrative. And they would say what has paralyzed the political process is what they call terrorism by these Palestinian groups, that they keep practicing targeting of civilians and attacks on civilians, as the likes of which we've just seen, sadly, a few days ago, and so many people lost their lives.
You know, this is again trying to flip things on its head. This is not a two-way occupation, it's a one-way occupation. Israel's doing the occupying, and Palestinians are resisting and trying to obtain their freedom. And if they don't like the response, which is violence, then they have to get to the root of it, which is occupation. End occupation, there won't be violence. But that's the problem, is that everybody keeps flipping it on its head, demanding that there will be a peaceful occupation. And even then, Israel doesn't do anything. So I think rather than the world blaming the victims, being the Palestinians, they should be looking at themselves and asking themselves, how is it that we've left this system in place now for such a long period of time? How is it that in 2023, we're still talking about the denial of freedom? How is it that this system is still in place and is now apartheid? How is it that this continues to happen? And that's where the problem lies. We need to have adults who are going to come forward and hold Israel accountable. Without that, Israel continue to do whatever it wants and dehumanize Palestinians in the process, and then be shocked when there is a response.
Gideon, I know you said earlier that you don't see there's a lot of difference right now in the thinking between the far right and I think the center left was what you were talking about. But bear with me for a moment, Gideon. When you look back at the statements of people in the Israeli government, like the Minister of Finance, Bezalel Smotrich, his call in March for Palestinian villages like Hawara to be erased.
That's crazy shit that you would even do shit like that, you know?
In the thinking, at least in that branch of Israeli body politics, about population change, erasing villages, erasing towns as a solution, as a policy option?
So far, Israel is doing it slowly, very gradually. But in the last months, and even in former governments, people were uprooted from their lands, people were uprooted from their homes, from their properties. And the silent wish was that if we'll tyrannize their lives badly enough, they might decide one day to leave. This didn't happen. No doubt that the rhetoric of those fascists who would answer the definition of neo-Nazis, would they be Europeans like Bezalel Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and those, no doubt that their rhetoric is really by far more extreme than the more civilized rhetoric of the central left. Maybe their plans are much more crazy. But by the end of the day, the real danger is from the so-called moderate ones, because they put the basic and they established the occupation. They established the settlement project, and they're establishing now the apartheid system. And they do it softly, or relatively softly, and therefore they are much more destructive because nobody gets against them. They do so-called normal things, you know, that the silent majority is supporting, both in Israel and in the world, while the extremists at least create some kind of alarm. So we should concentrate on the mainstream of Israel. This is our problem.
Francesca, if Israeli statesmen who are making statements like total siege, total bombing, if that is carried out, might we see a situation in which pressure will mount maybe on Egypt to open up their border and we witness some kind of mass exodus of Palestinians from Gaza into Egypt?
Well, this is what I understand is one of the possible scenarios, because this is what there have been statements by Israeli officials in this sense, and the response by Egypt challenging this. This is not a possible scenario. But what it seems to me is that the measures taken, including the bombing of the Rafah crossing, hints to an intention to really starve and kill the people who are inside the Gaza Strip now. Of course, Palestinians fear that the threat of a second Nakba, which wouldn't be really a second, because there have been so many instances of displacement, including, we shouldn't forget that in 1967, 350,000 Palestinians were displaced. So it's been an ongoing forced displacement for them. But of course, they fear that under threat, they will be forcibly displaced and never allowed to return even to the little and to the misery they have been confined to in Gaza.
Gideon, I know we talked a moment ago about what is the strategic thinking. Can we talk at least a bit about what is the broader goal? Is the calculus or is the broader goal here to try and return to a situation where you can have an occupation, an extended occupation with little cost to Israel's security, to its reputation, to get back to that kind of scenario? Is that what's being targeted?
That's exactly what Israel would like. Israel would like to live in peace and security without any connection to what it's being doing, both in Gaza, in the West, and in the West Bank. I mean, let us occupy, let us create an apartheid system, let us kill civilians, let us uproot them from their lands, and don't bother us, and don't resist, and behave yourself. And there is even a promise: if you will behave yourself, we will offer you the economical peace. Namely, we will bribe you with some money, some aid, and everyone will be happy. The Palestinians said on Saturday, not the first time, but in the most brutal and barbarian way, the Palestinians said on Saturday, this is not enough and this cannot last forever.
Diana, since we're talking about changing calculuses, has the calculus changed for internal Palestinian politics, especially the PA after the events, the recent events we're seeing?
Oh, most definitely, yes. Look, it's been changing for a while because we've increasingly seen that the Palestinian Authority has lost all support both in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. We are, of course, seeing that more and more people recognize that there needs to be resistance to military occupation. And the Palestinian Authority has done absolutely nothing to protect Palestinians or to even offer an alternative. So yes, the calculation has completely changed now within the mindset of Palestinians, so much so that Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, who was irrelevant before, has been made even more irrelevant now.
Francesca, what other political options going forward do you think in this kind of very bleak scenario?
Yeah, just one comment. And again, I know that this is something that might sound strong, but while there is a right to resist an oppressive regime, and the Palestinians have been under oppressive regime for decades now, it's also there is an imperative to remind ourselves that mass killing is not justified. So I would like to take Saturday as an example, not to follow.
For sure, Francesca.
Now, in terms of what are the political options, I will tell you what I would recommend, and because there is nothing that is really being put on the table by the main policymakers other than one-sided support and violence and armed responses. So I think that first of all, it's fundamental to negotiate a truce with immediate cessation of hostilities, the release of the hostages, but also the other persons, the Palestinians who are...
Francesca, one could argue we've gone through this so many times, haven't we, in conflicts, and they start all over again.
This is just the first step. This is just the first step. The second is reinforcing humanitarian aid and then forming a UN task force to ensure, to monitor truce, but also to ensure a protective presence of the Palestinians and others on the ground. Because, and again, this has always been put aside. This is in the short term. In the longer term, in medium term, what is need to be devised is a plan to end the occupation.
Be getting ready to come up
but not
they reset
in
the
years. It needs to start to be discussed now, and not envisaging the realization of Palestinian self-determination and freedom once the peace process is achieved, because this is like kicking the can in the air, frankly.
All right, there's plenty more, I'm sure, that we could discuss. We'll have to leave it there for now. Let's thank our guests, Francesca Albanese, Diana Butto, and Gideon Levy. And thank you too for watching. You can visit the show again anytime by heading over to our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You You can also join the conversation on X, formerly known as Twitter, you might remember. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zaidan, and the whole team here. For now, it's goodbye.
This is a live picture right here. That's the, what are they calling it, Iron Dome, going to work. Damn, he's taking a long time.
So it's 1800 GMT, that is 9 p.m. in Gaza and Israel, where the war is now in its fourth day. The Israeli military is bombarding Gaza. Hamas is launching more rockets, and the death toll on both sides is rising. Air and artillery strikes on Gaza have pounded the strip from north to south, targeting the port within the last few hours. At least 830 Palestinians have been killed, and at least 900 Israelis have been killed since Hamas launched an unprecedented military operation on Saturday. Hamas has vowed to respond to all Israeli strikes on Gaza with equal force. It fired a barrage of hundreds of rockets towards southern Israel. It targeted the port city of Ashkelon in recent hours after earlier warning people to leave. Israel has also imposed a total siege on Gaza, cutting off all supplies of food, water, and fuel. The European Union has opposed that move, saying that it is against international humanitarian law.
It means that when in the ground, Israel has the right to defense, certainly it has, but it has to be implemented according with the principles of international humanitarian law. And we call for the release of hostages, and we call for the access of food, water, and medicines, which is also according with international humanitarian law. And we call for a neat political solution that could avoid, once and again, this cycle of violence.
Now, there are growing concerns about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Rasul Serdar reports.
Building after building, block after block. All are now leveled. Many people inside, including children and the elderly, did not have time to escape. By midday on Tuesday, Israel had bombed nearly 2,000 locations in the densely populated Gaza Strip and promised to intensify its assault, leaving the 2.3 million Palestinians living there with nowhere to go.
The Israeli army made a phone call to a person who wasn't here. He was in Al Rimal. We came running and they told one of our neighbors that the building has to be evacuated. Where should they go? They said they can go to the sea. People started running and suddenly we heard an explosion. My brother's 2 children were standing in the doorway. They were killed.
On Monday, the Israeli defense minister announced a complete siege of the Gaza Strip, cutting off supplies of electricity, fuel, food, and water. The unrelenting bombardment of homes Communication towers, hospitals, roads and mosques has become a daily occurrence.
Our area, Al Ramal, is a quiet area, but when I came here I didn't recognize it. It's completely destroyed. All its features have changed. This is unfair. This is terrorism. There is no humanity. Families here live in peace and do not have any links to anything. What happened was revenge, a crime.
People are searching for survivors under the rubble. Nowhere is safe, and there is nowhere to go, they say.
We are told to evacuate the eastern part of Khan Yunis and go to a safe place, but there is no safe place in the Gaza Strip.
This hospital in Rafah is understaffed and under-equipped, and the number of people arriving here needing treatment keeps growing. Some of these children's parents have died. Many don't know yet how much they have lost.
Now there's a real massacre being committed against innocent civilians in the Sabra area. There are dozens of victims, and ambulances and civilian vehicles are still evacuating the victims from this house that was directly targeted.
Journalists reporting on the front lines of this war have also become targets. They, like many of Gaza's faces, are now gone forever. The Israeli airstrikes have already killed hundreds of people and injured thousands. But people in Gaza fear the worst is still to come. Resul Sardar, Al Jazeera.
Tarek Abu Azoum is live inside Gaza for us. Tarek, it's day 4 of this war, and yesterday Israel announced a total blockade of the Gaza Strip. No food, no water going into Gaza. How are civilians coping?
Well, for the ongoing Israeli blockade of the Gaza Strip and the closure of crossing borders, Palestinian humanitarian condition is deteriorating inside the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip is known to be one of the most densely populated areas in the world, that there are around 2 million Palestinians living inside 365 square kilometers in this place. Due to the Israeli ongoing shuttering of borders, the Gazans here are forcing such a great deterioration in their conditions, like with no food, enough food supplies, with no electricity, with lack of fuel, even to generate the sole distribution electricity company inside the Gaza Strip. The humanitarian situation is deteriorating. Now, Gazans here inside the Gaza Strip are expecting that the situation will go worse during the coming days if this shuttering will continue, as they are suffering the lack of the necessities and the basic needs of their lives. Now, we can clearly see that the majority of Gazans who are residing in areas adjacent to the Israeli borders have displaced their houses. According to the United Nations, more than 200,000 Palestinians were displaced from their houses, and they moved to shelters affiliated to the United Nations as well. So, and the rest of Palestinians, they have received different notes and even warnings from the Israeli authorities to evacuate the houses and to move to central areas. Now, we can say that hundreds of Palestinian families have no shelters. They don't have anyone inside the Gaza Strip to sit with, and even that a few number of families, they have relatives who are residing in the center of Gaza Strip to live with. So the majority of them now, they are facing such a traumatic situation that might be deteriorated more in the future.
And Tarek, despite the Israeli bombardments relentless on Gaza, Hamas is still able to launch rockets.
Okay, the Palestinian militant groups inside the Gaza Strip are continuing to firing rockets towards the Israeli cities in retaliation to the ongoing strikes on the Gaza Strip. The level of bombardment between both sides is rising, and even the casualties also is mounting due to the ongoing clashes. So the Palestinian militant groups inside the Gaza Strip, they are trying to confront what is being done inside the Gaza Strip in terms of the destruction of houses, the destruction of even civil infrastructure. So till this current moment, yes, the rockets have been fired from the Gaza Strip. Before a couple of minutes, the Palestinian militant groups inside the Gaza Strip has launched dozens of rockets towards the Israel central cities.
Tariq Abu-Azoum reporting live from inside Gaza. Thank you very much. I want to turn now to Al Jazeera's Hoda Abdelhamid in West Jerusalem. Hoda, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has been negotiating with the opposition to get their support for what is to come. What's the latest on that?
Well, if on schedule, a meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu and the leader of the National Unity Party, Benny Gantz, should happen in the next half hour or so. We don't know exactly what the outcome of that meeting will be, but we do know that earlier in the day, the coalition members of Netanyahu's government gave him the green light to go ahead with this emergency unity government, which is basically a war cabinet. We did hear from a member of the Likud party, the party of Mr. Netanyahu, that there were progress made, but he didn't elaborate. However, we also know that Benny Gantz, who is a former chief of staff and a former minister of defense, who was actually Minister of Defense during the Gaza war in 2014. We know that he had some preconditions for the formation or to join this emergency unity government. Among them is that that government would exclude the far-right members of the ruling coalition. He also wanted to make sure that his party would have a say in any decision-making of this war cabinet. And he also wanted to make sure that during that time, Knesset would not legislate on anything that is not war-related. So these were some of his conditions. We don't know if any compromise was met at this time, but the meetings, as I said, should start in about half an hour. It will probably take a few hours. And after that, we would expect a statement or an announcement. This is something we'll just be, we have to wait to see. But this is something that Prime Minister Netanyahu wants. He needs to show that he has the backing of the entire political spectrum of this country at this particular time.
Hoda, you say that you're waiting for a possible announcement from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu when he's wrapped up his negotiations with the opposition parties. We're also waiting, and I'm seeing the live feed right now, for a statement from the U.S. President Joe Biden, who will be speaking, we are told, momentarily, and he will be addressing the Israel-Gaza war. So when that happens, I'm just letting you know, Hoda, and letting our viewers know, when that happens, we will be carrying that speech live. Hoda, back to you. If we just leave politics aside for a moment, what's it like to be in Jerusalem right now? What is life like in Jerusalem?
Well, when you drive around Jerusalem, you feel that this is a city that is at a standstill. There's barely anyone on the streets. All businesses are shut. There's a grim mood. And that, I have to say, this is a city that has a substantial Palestinian and Jewish community living here. And there is worry on both sides of the divide, I would say, on what could happen next. You do feel that. I mean, I was in the south of the country, and I drove to Jerusalem last night, and I was looking around. And, you know, apart from when you reach these military bases where you saw all these hundreds of cars parked, which were all the cars of the reservists showing up for work, nothing else was happening in the country. There is worry, there is anxiety on what could happen next. There is also shock, because remember, Prime Minister Netanyahu has always sold himself as Mr. Security. That is what made the success of his political career. He was seen as a man who knew to take bold decisions, who was firm, and who didn't take any chances when it came specifically to Hamas. Well, all that crumbled. The myth of the invincible Israeli military has crumbled and has shocked this nation. And now, if you ask Palestinians, they are worried. Palestinians here in Jerusalem are worried that they will pay the price.
There is no such thing as real news anymore,
the border
Doc.
with Gaza. They say that they're already under pressure. They think there'll be
It's all
more
propaganda
pressure. I was
anymore.
with a taxi driver who was telling me that now it's
The only real
impossible to
news
just
is
stand idle
you have
in
to
front
be
of
out there and
Damascus
actually
Gate,
see it
which is
for
the
yourself.
entrance to the old city, without the military coming and telling you to move immediately. On the Israeli side, there's shock, there's anger, there's worry, and at the moment, they need to show that they're united, but many have many questions to ask once all this dust settles.
Yeah, Hoda, and really interesting what you were saying about how Mr. Netanyahu's political image is to be Mr. Security, and now at least 900 Israelis have been killed on his watch. So what would the political consequences of that be, medium to long term? That'll be interesting to watch as well. Al Jazeera's Hoda Abdelhamid reporting from West Jerusalem. Thank you very much. As I said, we are waiting.
Blue?
We're on what we call a hard watch for
That's what it
a
boils
speech
down
by
to.
the U.S. President Joe Biden. He's expected to speak about the situation in Israel and Gaza. Let's go live to Kimberly Halkett, our White House correspondent. Kimberly, you already have an outline of what the president might be saying and addressing.
Yeah, that's right. The U.S. president has held his third call in 4 days with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And so we are expecting to hear from the president about what they have talked about in terms of additional security assistance that the United States is providing to Israel. It does provide to the tune of $3.8 billion in annual security assistance. We have spoken to the national security
Think how much
spokesperson, John
$3.8
Kirby.
billion
Al
in
Jazeera
annual
has ascertained that
assistance
there
would help
is
the
an
homelessness
additional
population in America.
supply of not only interceptor missiles, but also ammunition that is on its way to Israel. This is part of a request by Israel to the United States. We know that there may be more that has been requested. We don't know what that entails, and perhaps the U.S. president will outline that. We also know that the U.S. president is expected to say no boots on the ground. In other words, no U.S. soldiers will be going to help the Israeli
No, it won't be
military
US
in any
soldiers,
way.
but it'll be
And
US
also,
missiles
we expect the U.S.
and US
president to talk
ammo
about
and
a concern of anti-Semitism being on the rise in the United States and his condemnation of that Jews in the United States should be able to worship freely. We do know that he is also expected to echo some of what we've heard from the Biden administration throughout the last 72 hours,
Yeah,
that the
you're right,
American
Blue. It does
people
cause
stand shoulder
homelessness
to
in other
shoulder
countries.
with Israeli citizens, that the United States opposes what they call terrorism in all forms, and that Israel has the right to defend itself, and that the United States sees the ultimate solution in terms of trying to resolve the ongoing conflict between Israel and the Palestinians.
That's right.
As the two-state
Absolutely
solution.
zero ferry boots on the ground.
That's Kimberly Halkett, Al Jazeera's White House correspondent, giving us the latest and the outline of that speech. Even as you see what appears to be an Israeli target that just, beg your pardon, an Israeli strike that just took
Only
place in the Gaza
800
Strip
that we know
moments
of, Doc.
ago. All right, my mistake. Forgive me. Those are not live pictures center screen right now. Let's go to Al Jazeera's Mohammed Jamjoom, who joins us live from Ashdod in southern Israel near the border with Gaza. Mohammed, I know you've been moving around for your reporting quite a bit around those localities in southern Israel. Why don't you tell us, what you've seen and what's happening?
Cyril, let me just tell you about a very fluid situation that's been developing in the past 10 minutes or so. It's very volatile here at the moment. I'm just going to ask our cameraman to walk with me a bit and to show you what we're seeing. This juncture here in Ashdod, which is on the coast in the south of Israel, this was pretty much empty just about 15 minutes ago. Massive influx of security here in the last 10 minutes. You've had soldiers, you've had police, and I just want you to be aware that we might be asked to move at any minute here. Essentially what we're told is that there is concern at this hour that there may have been an infiltration of Hamas fighters coming from the sea, from the coast, that direction. That's why we're seeing a lot of patrolling going on. Let me just get out of the way here. A lot of patrolling going on here right now. This perimeter, we're seeing soldiers, police fan out in that direction toward the coast. We're seeing them among the tree line over there, silhouetted. A lot of worry about what exactly this means for Ashdod at this hour. At one point, we were asked if we or other journalists in the area had been flying a drone. There was concern that perhaps there was something up above us. We, of course, said that we are not flying any drones. We are not utilizing any drones. But the police have told us they may be asking us to move at any minute because there is a lot of worry at this hour that potentially there is infiltration or attempted infiltration by Hamas fighters into Ashdod. Cyril?
Yeah, Mohammed, I wonder for our viewers, to give them a sense of perspective, roughly how far away are you from the Gaza Strip? Because I think for people who've never been to Israel, it can be a little hard to fathom how close Israelis actually live to the Gaza Strip in some areas.
Absolutely. Well, Cyril, when I was speaking to you a couple of hours ago, we were in another area just north of the Gaza Strip. We were in Zakim. We have had to move because of security concerns. We are now in Ashdod. Ashdod is actually about 30 or so kilometers north of the Gaza Strip. So that shows you the level of concern in the entirety of the southern region by the security forces as to potential infiltration. That just kind of giving you a sense of the area that is being patrolled, that is being watched by the security forces. Now, we should also mention that in the past, just one moment, I think there might be a security officer wanting to talk to us. No, we're okay now. All right. So, we've also heard that in the last hour there have been gun clashes in two kibbutzes in the south, Kibbutz Re'im and Kibbutz Mefasim, and that there have been Hamas fighters that have been killed as a result of these gunfights with the Israeli army in those communities. So still a very volatile situation in the south. We know from statements from the Israeli military that the Israeli military says that they have retaken control of the border area, that they are continuing to evacuate certain towns, certain cities. The city that we were outside of a couple of hours ago, Zakim, we found out that the residents in that area have been told by the security forces not to evacuate yet, that they need to stay and shelter in place because they are still trying to clear that area of Hamas fighters. And in fact, earlier in the day, there was news that 4 Hamas fighters had infiltrated that area and had been killed by the Israeli army. So this really just goes to show how volatile, how fluid the situation remains. Cyril, let me just tell you, just about 20 minutes ago, before all of this started, it was a completely different picture where we are right now. You had settlers that had come here to show their support to members of the army. They were blasting their loudspeakers, playing music, dancing in front of the police officers and reservists and troops that were assembled to show their support for the Israeli security forces. They left within a few minutes after that, as we were waiting to talk to you. The situation completely changed. And as I said before, we are continuing to see more troops mobilized in this area, fanning out this perimeter, going in the direction of the coast, and basically on the lookout right now, trying to ascertain exactly what the security situation is at this hour. Cyril?
Mohammed, look, you've spent a lot of time reporting in Israel. Can you speak a little bit, for the benefit of our viewers who've never been to Israel, can you speak a little bit about just how unusual this situation is where you are? I mean, you just told us moments ago that the security team behind you has concerns about a possible sea invasion by Hamas into Israel. I mean, Ashdod has come under rocket fire from the Gaza Strip before, but a sea invasion, I mean, that's something that, frankly, and correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't imaginable for the longest time.
And just to add to your point, Cyril, it was just the day before yesterday that you had a rocket that hit in the center of Ashdod, a rocket that had been fired from Gaza. So this community here in Ashdod has really been shaken even before then, but especially these last couple of days. People have been on heightened alert because of the security situation. But look, what I can tell you is everybody that I've been speaking with the past couple of days in these southern areas, even if you weren't to talk to them, even if you were just to look at them, you can see the palpable sense of shock on their faces, the fact that nobody would have expected that this could have happened here. Everybody that I've spoken with has said that it's been hard for them to actually process the enormity, the magnitude of what transpired on Saturday.
among them at least 14 American citizens killed. Parents butchered using their bodies to try to protect their children.
Thanks,
Stomach-turning
David.
reports
You
of
rock, bro.
babies being killed. Entire families slain. Young people massacred while attending a musical festival to celebrate peace. Women raped, assaulted, paraded as trophies. Families hid their fear for hours and hours, desperately trying to keep their children quiet to avoid drawing attention. And thousands of wounded, alive but carrying with them the bullet holes and the shrapnel wounds and the memory of what they endured. You all know these traumas never go away. There's still so many families desperately waiting to hear the fate of their loved ones, not knowing if they're alive or dead or hostages. Infants in their mother's arms, grandparents in wheelchairs, Holocaust survivors abducted and held hostage. Hostages whom Hamas has now threatened to execute in violation of every code of human morality. It's abhorrent. The brutality of Hamas, these bloodthirstiness brings to mind the worst rampages of ISIS. This is terrorism.
Are you blocked from having memberships because of copyright claims? Because I know
brought to the surface
they've been
painful
doing
memories
that a lot lately.
and the scars left by a millennia of anti-Semitism and genocide of the Jewish people. So in this moment, we must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. And we will make sure Israel has what it needs to take care of its citizens, defend itself, and respond to this attack. There's no justification for terrorism. There's no excuse. Hamas does not stand for the Palestinian people's right to dignity and self-determination. Its stated purpose is the annihilation of the state of Israel and the murder of Jewish people. They use Palestinian civilians as human shields. Hamas offers nothing but terror and bloodshed with no regard to who pays the price. The loss of innocent life is heartbreaking. Like every nation in the world, Israel has the right to respond, indeed has a duty to respond to these vicious attacks. I just got off the phone with a third call with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I told him, the United States experience what Israel is experiencing, our response would be swift, decisive, and overwhelming. We also discussed how democracy states are stronger and more secure when we act according to the rule
This guy's
of
camera
law.
work sucks. I'm going to try and go to this other
Terrorists purposely target civilians, kill them. We uphold the laws of war, the law of war. It matters. There's a difference. Stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. Country are praying for all those families that have been ripped apart. A lot of us know how it feels. It leaves a black hole in your chest when you lose family. Feeling like you're being sucked in. The anger, the pain, the sense of hopelessness. This is what they mean by a human tragedy, an atrocity on an appalling scale. We're going to continue to stand united, supporting the people of Israel who are suffering unspeakable losses and opposing the hatred and violence of terrorism. My team has been in near constant communication with our Israeli partners and partners all across the region and the world from the moment this crisis began. We're military assistance, including ammunition and interceptors to replenish Iron Dome. We're going to make sure that Israel does not run out of these critical assets to defend its cities and its citizens. My administration has consulted closely with Congress throughout this crisis. And when Congress returns, we're going to ask them to take urgent action to fund the national security requirements of our critical partners. This is not about party or politics. This is about the security of our world, the security of the United States of America. We now know that American citizens are among those being held by Hamas. I've directed my team to share intelligence and deploy additional experts from across the United States government to consult with and advise Israeli counterparts on hostage recovery efforts. Because as president, I have no higher priority than the safety of Americans being held hostage around the world. The United States has also enhanced our military force posture in the region to strengthen our deterrence. The Department of Defense has moved the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group to the Eastern Mediterranean and bolstered our fighter aircraft presence. And we stand ready to move in additional assets as needed. Let me say again, to any country, any organization, anyone thinking of taking advantage of this situation, I have one word: don't. Don't. Our hearts may be broken, but our resolve is clear. Yesterday, I also spoke with the leaders of France, Germany, Italy, and UK to discuss the latest developments with our European allies and coordinate our united response. This comes on top of days of steady engagement with partners across the region. We're also taking steps at home. In cities across the United States of America, police departments have stepped up. Security around centers of Jewish life. The Department of Homeland Security and the Federal Bureau of Investigation are working closely with state and local law enforcement and Jewish community partners to identify and disrupt any domestic threat that could emerge in connection with these horrific attacks. This is a moment for the United States to come together, to grieve with those who are mourning. Let's be real clear. There is no place for hate in America. Not against Jews, not against Muslims, not against anybody. We reject. What we reject is terrorism. We condemn the indiscriminate evil, just as we've always done. That's what America stands for. You know, just over 50 years ago, I was thinking about it this morning, talking to the Secretary of State, the Vice President in my office. Over 50 years ago, as a young senator,
I think we should take care of our own we can't even take care of our own country, let alone send billions and billions and trillions of dollars fucking overseas. Money that we don't have.
Just before the Yom Kippur War.
I don't get it.
And I guess she could see the consternation on my face as she described what was being faced. They were facing.
It's like America turned into Captain Save-A-Ho.
That sort of hallway.
No, she's there. She's right there.
She looked at me all of a sudden and said,
I don't know why they keep changing camera angles. Their sound is fucked up.
Followed her out. We were standing there silent, looking at the press. She could tell, I guess, I was concerned. She leaned over and whispered to me. She said, "Don't worry, Senator Biden. We have a secret rep in here in Israel." My word is what she said. We have no place else to go.
He's a creepy fuck, isn't he?
We have no place else to go. For 75 years, Israel has stood as the ultimate guarantor of the security of Jewish people around the world, so that the atrocities of happen again.
The hell did he just say?
Let there be no doubt. The United States has Israel's back. We will make sure the Jewish and democratic state of Israel can defend itself today, tomorrow, as we always have. It's as simple as that. These atrocities have been sickening.
Yeah, exactly.
We're with Israel. Let's make no mistake. Thank you.
Mr. President, what was your reaction?
He's out. He gotta go take a nap.
whispered to me, she said, "Don't worry, Senator Biden. We have a secret rep in here in Israel." My word is what she said. We have no place else to go. We have no place else to go. For 75 years, Israel has stood as the ultimate guarantor of the security of Jewish people around the world, so that the atrocities of the past could never happen again. And let there be no doubt, the United States has Israel's back. We will make sure the Jewish and democratic state of Israel can defend itself today, tomorrow, as we always have. It's as simple as that. These atrocities have been sickening. We're with Israel. Let's make no mistake. Thank you.
Mr. President, what was your reaction?
I'm not going to answer no fucking
Okay,
questions.
you've just been listening to the U.S. President Joe Biden and his address from the White House on the Israel-Gaza war. A very strong speech. We're going to be talking to Marwan Bashara, Al Jazeera's senior political analyst. You're joining us from Paris. First, though, let's go live to Kimberly Halkett, our White House correspondent in Washington, D.C. Kimberly, it's not the first time that Biden speaks since this is day 4 of the war. Not the first time we've heard Biden, but the first time we've heard him like this, in this much detail. And, you know, he chose to open his speech with, I think, with a very strong emotional payload, it's fair to say.
Yeah, the United States has Israel's back, and certainly we've always known that in terms of the dollars that are spent, but it's certainly something that was reiterated by the U.S. president. And a lot of what we heard in this speech was things that we've heard in the past few days, that Israel has a right to defend itself, that it has, the United States wants to make sure that it has what it needs to respond. In other words, the president there, as commander-in-chief of the U.S. military, saying that it will surge in terms of the munitions that the Israeli military needs in order to defend itself. The U.S. president outlining there, we expected we might have had a few more details than we actually got from the president. We were a little thin on details there. But the U.S. president talking about his call with the Israeli prime minister, that the Israeli military is promising a swift and overwhelming response in terms of what it calls retaliation towards Hamas. What I do want to point out, though, is one sort of point of what you might call hypocrisy on the part of the U.S. president, where he talked about the United States in alliance with Israel, saying that what the distinction between what he called the terrorists is that they believe they uphold the law in terms of the rules of international law and war. He said that only terrorists would attack civilians, but clearly that is not entirely accurate, because what we've seen in recent days, obviously, is the Israeli military cutting off not only food, but electricity and water to the Palestinians in Gaza. We've certainly seen the attacks that have been not surgical, but in fact being sort of a large swath of apartment complexes that we know have allowed for women, children, elderly to be caught up in this. And so for the president to say that they have been abiding by the rules of law certainly is would not be accurate. And to be partnering with Israel in this would certainly not be accurate. And I think that one more thing that we should point out in all of this is the language the president used when he talked about the United States coming together. And this is not a time for party or politics. This is about the security of the world. This is very much the type of language that we heard back around the September 11th attacks. And many people have called this Israel's 9/11, for lack of a better term or terminology.
Hey, I got an idea. Let's send a whole bunch of people over and let's fund the Protect Israeli border.
When it comes to kind of the military
the whole
industrial
time we'll leave
complex
the
and
whole
the warmongers
American
on Capitol
border
Hill,
unchecked and just,
one can kind of be troubled by hearing this, that maybe this is a White House pivoting towards a conflict or a broader conflict. As much as they say they are not looking to see this escalate, that they may at least be preparing for that.
Well, Kimberly, stand by. Stay with us. Everything you've said is duly noted. It's also interesting to note the contrast. Even as President Joe Biden was speaking, we had the live picture of the skies over Gaza, and we saw repeated military bombardments of the Gaza Strip. Marwan, I want to bring you in, and I want to get your thoughts on this speech. U.S. President Joe Biden saying Israel has not only a right to respond, but quote, a duty to respond.
I haven't, Charlie.
Yes, you know, having followed
Hey, there we go, Chad. Let's send all the 1A auditors over.
A speaker with excellent English and an incredible reservoir of sound bites. Having read his books and followed his speeches for the past 30 years, I tell you, every single word Biden said is a Netanyahu word. I think the Prime Minister of Israel has once again brainwashed the American president. And it's really sad to see the leader of the free world, as he calls himself, repeating word for word, verbatim, what Netanyahu, I guess, have told him. Because much of that soundbite that we just heard from the American president sounds to me like he was told from Netanyahu. The point about the sole purpose of Hamas is to kill Jews, bloodthirsty. This is not an American president's words. This is the Netanyahu's words, and he's been using them forever. And the point about the Palestinians using a human shield, this is Netanyahu's soundbite. That's not an American president's soundbite. You would always expect that an American president, when it comes to Israel, that American presidents act like the grown-ups in the room, and that they would, you know, advise patience and advise maturity and advise certain soberness towards dealing with these sorts of questions that are complicated in the Middle East. Except in this case, what we see is President Biden repeating what the Israeli Prime Minister told him. And on the other points that Kimberly mentioned, I don't have to repeat them, but they are very accurate. Because the indiscriminate bombing of Gaza and the collective punishment of Gaza and the blockading and the siege and cutting off of electricity, fuel, food, goods, and so on and so forth, that is not international law, and these are not the laws of war. This is a direct violation of international law, and President Biden knows it. He knows it. But he chose, once again, for the third time that I heard him the last 3 days, he chooses again and again to ignore the plight of the Palestinians, which is absolutely nonsensical, because this conflict involves two people. Now, it's okay, it's expected for leaders to demonize one another. And it's okay and it's expected for the American president and the Israeli prime minister to demonize Hamas and Palestinian leadership in general. It's called politics. But dehumanizing an entire people is not politics, it's racism. When you dehumanize the Palestinian people who have been living under occupation for more than 55 years, dispossessed of their belongings for the past 75 years, this dehumanization is racism. They cannot continue to be racist towards the Palestinians because they are the weaker party, or for political expediency, which takes me to the third point. He says we're all united and we're all this and that and the other thing. Humbug. We all know, and you read that throughout the American press, that Biden is trying to jump on the bandwagon because the Republicans had undermined him and accused him of financing, incorrectly as it might be, Iran that finances this sort of operation against Israel. So he is basically regaining the initiatives, and instead of saying, no, we did not, and the money is still in the Qatar Central Bank, he's basically now trying to kill by going even beyond what the Republicans have been saying and showing this incredible friendship to Israel and unconditional support. And once again, he underlined that America is dispatching the aircraft carrier and the strike force to the East Mediterranean. And he said and warned anyone, state or non-state actor, which I presume probably is Hezbollah, don't, he said. So what does that mean? Is he issuing an ultimatum that if anyone attacks Israel, including Hezbollah, America is going to get involved? Really? America wants to get involved into another regional war after Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, and so on and so forth? This is the
and
president
the list keeps going.
That promised to end the forever wars and got out humiliated out of Afghanistan. He really wants to start another war because Hamas carried a gruesome attack in southern Israel. That is not a grown-up conversation. That's not a grown-up speech, and that is not a way to deal with a complicated conflict, and certainly not by dehumanizing an entire people. That is racism.
Well, Marwan, how do you read that line, the one you just referenced? He said, quote, any country, organization thinking of taking advantage of this situation, don't. It appears the U.S. president is putting his money where his mouth is, to the extent that they're providing military, they are surging, I think is the word that's being used today, surging their military aid to Israel. They're going to replenish their ammunition stocks for the Iron Dome system. And even as I speak, we just saw the U.S. aircraft carrier that's being sent to the region. So there is real military hardware that is being, increased and that Biden is bringing to bear on this situation.
And it's ultimately mad. All our hearts goes to all the civilians dying, including American civilians and Israeli civilians. But the idea you respond to the killing of civilians by sending aircraft carriers to the East Mediterranean, and I've just read that there's Israeli reports that maybe another aircraft carrier might be sent towards the East Mediterranean. This is just madness. And by the way, October 10 apparently is World Mental Health Day. So I'm worried that we are all losing our minds, because the idea that an American president issues an ultimatum here where we are with our aircraft carriers that could probably, start a third world war, that we are here and we are warning
People are
any
losing
one of
their
you
mind.
that will, attack.
He
or
clearly
take
has not
advantage
been
of
to
the
Walmart at
situation,
2 a.m.
Then that presumably America will respond. This is a dangerous escalation. And I'll tell you why this is particularly a dangerous escalation. And allow me to use just one concept in military strategic affairs. Thucydides' trap, which basically says, you build up your forces in anticipation of a danger. The other party, feeling insecure, builds up their own armaments and position in order to balance out your threats and your military augmentation. So what happens is now Hezbollah, Iran, and whoever else is also on their toes, while America is awaiting anyone to provoke. And what you have is a possibility that this thing will go out of hand simply by, Hezbollah launching more missiles against Israel, and suddenly you have America involved in another Middle Eastern war. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu has manipulated the American president into getting involved, perhaps eventually, hopefully not, into another regional conflict. That would be catastrophic. One, for Israel. Two, for America. And certainly for the United States and the Middle East region. I think the United States needs to sober up. I think it needs to get its politics out of its strategy. I think they need to hold back. I think they need to start talking about diplomacy. And I think it's time for the American president to start speaking about an immediate ceasefire. Even if it's just empty words, we need to hear him. We need to hear the American president and his European allies, in addition to expressing their unconditional support to Israel, to start speaking about diplomacy and ending the state of war. Because we all know, and I think the American president probably should know first, that there is no military solution to the Palestinian problem. There isn't even a military solution to Hamas, because it is a resistance group. It is not sole purpose is to kill Jews. Hamas was born in the 1980s as a result of the Israeli occupation. Hamas did not exist before the Israeli occupation existed. No, it is not anti-Semitism. Hamas is not Palestinian resistance is not anti-Semitism. Even if some of them would actually use some horrific, unacceptable language against Israel and Jews. but it's not anti-Semitic. It's resistance against occupation. And they are the product of occupation. And it is sad day that we are where we are here because of Israel's occupation and American support, unconditional support to Israel as it continues to occupy and settle illegally in Palestine.
Marwan Bashar, look, thank you very much for your reaction and commentary after the speech we just heard from the U.S. President Joe Biden a very short while ago from the White House. Thanks, Marwan. There have also been explosions on Israel's northern border with Lebanon, so I want to take you there now. And we are joined by Al Jazeera's correspondent Ali Hashem. Ali, what's been happening there?
Cyril, there is a significant development with Hamas's Al-Qassam brigades issuing a statement claiming responsibility for the missiles or the rockets that were launched in South Lebanon today. This is very significant because if we put this beside yesterday's Islamic Jihad's infiltration to the borders towards Israel and engaging in a battle with the Israeli army, we're seeing now a new dynamic here on the Lebanese front. As I said before, this is an operation area. And this operation area is now engaging Palestinian factions on Lebanese soil. And this is the first time since 1982 that Palestinian factions are engaging directly in a fight with the Israelis on the Lebanese borders. This is the development that seems to be different than all what's been happening the past days. Yes, Hezbollah has attacked in the past few days Israeli posts in Shebaa farms. It retaliated yesterday for Israel's airstrike on its positions today. And just a few hours ago, Hezbollah issued a statement claiming responsibility for an attack on an Israeli military vehicle in Avivim with guided missiles. So it's getting more and more complicated. Situation is escalating day after day. However, it's still contained. We can't say that it's out of control, but the more there is blood, the more things are going to go out of control.
Yeah, Ali, as you say, it's still contained, but you're keeping a very close watch on this because, as all our guests have been telling us, as you've been telling us, there is a potential for things to escalate dramatically, not just in the Gaza Strip, but right where you are. Thank you very much, Al Jazeera's Ali Hashem in southern Lebanon. Now, we opened the hour telling you what was happening in Gaza, in southern Israel. We carried the speech out of Washington. We just showed you what's happening at the Lebanon-Israel border. We also want to show you what's happening in the occupied West Bank, because Israel has blocked travel routes inside the occupied West Bank. Imran Khan has this report from Ramallah.
Okay, I'm going back. I'm going back. Avanti.
up, behind that,
The occupied West Bank is now not only occupied, it's effectively blockaded. The Israeli army has turned it into an archipelago of separation. You can't leave your home to go visit family or friends in a neighboring area. 3.2 million Palestinians are simply stuck.
I left 10 minutes ago. I am sick, but they're not letting me in. This is worse than when we used mules to move around in the old days. Now we can't even get anywhere with cars.
Israeli forces have also severely restricted the border with Jordan, the only crossing point for Palestinians who want to travel abroad, leaving thousands stranded. Sohail Khalaliya is the head of settlement monitoring at the Applied Research Institute, Jerusalem. He specializes in Israel's system of checkpoints and restrictions on Palestinians.
The West Bank is surrounded by hundreds of checkpoints, at the border with Egypt, at the Green Line, or within the West Bank. These new restrictions have turned the West Bank into small prisons, and the occupier controls all entries and exits.
This is the DCO checkpoint just north of Ramallah. It divides Palestinian territory. Now, the Israelis make it very difficult for Palestinians to normally cross this checkpoint, but now it's impossible. They've just shut it down completely. In the Palestinian town of Huwara, this road that runs through it cannot be used by Palestinians. Sometimes the Israelis make exceptions for medical or family emergencies, but even that small concession has now gone. If you're Palestinian and you visited a neighbouring area on Saturday, you're now stuck there.
Many here feel this effective blockade may not be temporary, that it's simply a precursor to even heavier Israeli restrictions that may well become permanent. Imran Khan, Al Jazeera, Ramallah, the occupied West Bank.
Sir Geoffrey Nice joins us from Canterbury, UK. He is Emeritus Gresham Professor of Law. Sir, I had a long list of questions for you, but we just heard the U.S. President. He said a short while ago from the White House, quote, "We uphold the rule of law and the laws of war. It matters. There's a difference," end quote. Presumably, he was drawing a distinction between the legality of Hamas's actions, Hamas's attack in Israel, and Israel's attack on the Gaza Strip. Can you help our viewers navigate this? What is legal and not legal in what you've been watching over the last 4 days?
He may well have been drawing that distinction. And before I come to the specific answer to your question, I was inclined to make this observation. President Biden and Israel could do a great deal for the rule of law if they joined up to the International Criminal Court and allowed that court to investigate the legality both of the occupation to date, bearing in mind the illegality of the war in Israel, and submit peacefully to legal adjudication of what they're doing. It's an unhappy reality that Israel is more or less immune from the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, that America will save it if there's any attempt to refer it there by the Security Council, and that America itself is not a member of that court. As to your specific question, then I think the following has to be accepted. The strike by Hamas is pretty obviously unlawful. They give reasons for it, but I don't think the reasons would merit a defense if challenged in court. The attack by Israel may or may not be justified in part. Defense against the rockets? Certainly. Self-defense, already a hard issue from them to advance for several reasons, not just because of the overall circumstances, but because you defend yourself against a state, and Gaza is not a state. It's also an occupied territory, and it's occupied by Israel. So there's got out the initial problems about the legality of what it's doing, although defending itself against the rockets is undoubtedly legal. The nature of its attack on Gaza is much, much more problematic for it. And the language of the politicians and military leaders is something we must watch with great care. Siege may just about in certain circumstances be legal. For example, if the siege is of a territory or a town or an area that is comprised entirely of opposing forces. That is not the case here. And siege brings with it the inevitability of the risk of starvation. It's almost forecast by what is said by Israel. And intentional starvation is now recognized without any doubt as an international crime. So the attack by the response attack, let's not use a pejorative term.
All right.
What Israel is doing is problematic in at least those areas.
Sir Geoffrey Nice, again, I would have loved for this conversation to last a lot longer. We hadn't quite forecast the speech and the length of the speech by the U.S. president, but I thank you so much for that invaluable analysis of what is legal, what's not legal, and what's a gray area when it comes to the law of war. And that's it for me, Cyril Vanier. Up next is Emily Angwin at the top of the hour on Al Jazeera. Do stay with us.
There is no channel that covers world news like we do. The scale of this camp is like nothing you've ever seen. Access to healthcare is something. What we want to know is, how do these things affect people? We revisit places, we stay, even when there are no international headlines. Al Jazeera really invests in that, and that's a privilege as a journalist.
I don't know. I'll be honest, it's hard to believe any of these motherfuckers.
Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani International Anti-Corruption Excellence Award. Nominate your hero now.
The Geneva International Motor Show is coming to Qatar.
Actually, if I was in Qatar, man, I'd definitely want to go see that car show. It looks like it would be pretty cool.
إذن مشاهدينا في اليوم الرابع لعملية طوفان الأقصى يكثف الاحتلال الإسرائيلي قصفه على مختلف أنحاء.
No clue what she's saying.
Developments on Al Jazeera.
Dozens of rockets fired towards the southern Israeli city of Ashkelon after residents were urged to evacuate. The US president condemns the attacks.
This is an act of sheer evil. More than 1,000 civilians slaughtered.
Hello, I'm Emily Angwin. This is Al Jazeera Live from Doha with our continuing special coverage of the Gaza-Israel war. Also coming up, Israel continues its bombardment of Gaza into the night after another day of death and destruction. More than 830 Palestinians are dead, including 140 children. Hospitals are overwhelmed in the besieged city as the United Nations calls for a humanitarian corridor into Gaza. The number of Israelis killed rises to more than 900 after Saturday's surprise attack in the south. And tensions mount in the border region of Israel and Lebanon following the exchange of fire over the past 3 days. Welcome to the program. It's 1900 GMT. That's 10 p.m. in Gaza and Israel, where the war is now into its fourth day. The Israeli military is bombarding Gaza. Hamas is launching more rockets, and the death toll on both sides is rising. Air and artillery strikes on Gaza have pounded the strip from north to south, targeting the port within the last few hours. At least 830 Palestinians have been killed, and more than 900 Israelis have died since Hamas launched its surprise military operation on Saturday. Hamas has vowed to respond to all Israeli strikes on Gaza with equal force. It fired a barrage of hundreds of rockets towards southern Israel. It targeted the port city of Ashkelon after earlier warning people to leave. Israel has also imposed a total siege on Gaza, cutting off all supplies of food, water and fuel. The European Union has opposed the move. US President Joe Biden has confirmed that 14 Americans were killed in Hamas's military operation. He also reiterated Washington's support for Israel.
We must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. And we will make sure Israel has what it needs to take care of its citizens, defend itself, and respond to this attack. There's no justification for terrorism. There's no excuse. Hamas does not stand for the Palestinian people's right to dignity and self-determination.
No, I'm with you on that.
The stated purpose is the annihilation of the state of Israel and the murder of Jewish people. They use Palestinian civilians as human shields. Hamas offers nothing but terror and bloodshed with no regard to who pays the price.
There are growing concerns about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Here's our reporter Resil Sada with the latest.
Building after building, block after block. All are now leveled. Many people inside, including children and the elderly, did not have time to escape. By midday on Tuesday, Israel had bombed nearly 2,000 locations in the densely populated Gaza Strip and promised to intensify its assault, leaving the 2.3 million Palestinians living there with nowhere to go.
The Israeli army made a phone call to a person who wasn't here. He was in Al Rimal. We came running and they told one of our neighbors that the building has to be evacuated. Where should they go? They said they can go to the sea. People started running and suddenly we heard an explosion. My brother's 2 children were standing in the doorway. They were killed.
On Monday, the Israeli defense minister announced a complete siege of the Gaza Strip, cutting off supplies of electricity, fuel, food, and water. The unrelenting bombardment of homes, communication towers, hospitals, roads, and mosques has become a daily occurrence.
Our area, Al Ramal, is a quiet area, but when I came here, I didn't recognize it. It's completely destroyed. All its features have changed. This is unfair. This is terrorism. There is no humanity. Families here live in peace and do not have any links to anything. What happened was revenge, a crime.
People are searching for survivors under the rubble. Nowhere is safe, and there is nowhere to go, they say.
We are told to evacuate the eastern part of Khan Yunis and go to a safe place, but there is no safe place in the Gaza Strip.
This hospital in Rafah is understaffed and under-equipped, and the number of people arriving here needing treatment keeps growing. Some of these children's parents have died. Many don't know yet how much they have lost.
Now there's a real massacre being committed against innocent civilians in the Sabra area. There are dozens of victims, and ambulances and civilian vehicles are still evacuating the victims from this house that was directly targeted.
Journalists reporting on the front lines of this war have also become targets. They, like many of Gaza's faces, are now gone forever.
Sad thing about it, ultimately the
Israeli airstrikes have already killed hundreds of people and injured
on
thousands. But people in Gaza fear
they're the ones
the
paying
worst
the ultimate
is still
price.
to come. Resul Sardar, Al Jazeera.
Okay, let's head to Tarek Abu Azum, who's in Gaza for us. Tarek, we've seen multiple strikes across the city and boats have also been hit in the port. What's the latest on the ground?
Well, the Israeli occupation army continues targeting and bounding the Gaza Strip with heavy bombardment during the past hour. The main concentration of the Israeli targets was in the northern areas of the Gaza Strip, which was severely bombarded and destructed during the past hour as well. Yet the number of the casualties in these struck areas is not yet confirmed and still unknown. But according to the latest updates released by the Palestinian Ministry of Health inside the Gaza Strip in a press conference, it has stated that the death toll has increased to around 900 Palestinian killed on the hands of the Israeli occupation, and including 260 kids among the victims. Israel is still shuttering and ordered to the cut off of electricity, water and food supplies to the Gaza Strip at the current moment. So the situation in the Gaza Strip is exacerbating amid the ongoing closure of borders.
Yes, that brings me to my next question, Tarek. We know hospitals are overwhelmed and there are 180,000 people displaced. What's the humanitarian situation we're heading towards?
Well, the humanitarian situation is deteriorating due to the ongoing strikes of the Israeli occupation now. We can say that more than 200,000 Palestinians, according to the United Nations, have been displaced from their houses. They headed to find a safe shelter for themselves. Now, the main shelter was afforded for them were the UNRWA schools generally. So now the capacity of UNRWA school has been full during the last couple of days or since the early eruption of this conflict. Now, the other part of the Palestinian people now, they're still living in their houses, but main in fact they have such a great shortage of electricity, so they cannot even sometimes afford the basic needs amid the ongoing closure of borders. Now, the Gaza Strip even is suffering from the destruction of some phone networks, telecommunication networks. So the sometimes the phone connection might be cut due to the Israeli destruction of telecommunication satellite telecommunication towers inside the Strip as well.
Okay, thanks so much for the update, Tarek Abu Azum in Gaza.
Thank you.
I'm joined by Mohammed Jamjoom now, who is live for us in Ashdod in southern Israel, near the border with Gaza. Mohammed, explain where you are and just how fluid is the situation at the moment?
Yes.
Have we got Mohammed? I'll just double check if we've got Mohammed there. Mohammed, it's an incredibly fluid situation. Explain to us where you are and what's happening.
Emily, we're in Ashdod, the city of Ashdod, and just in the past hour, well, actually hour and a half, security situation has become extremely tenuous. We've had to come indoors. The last live shot I was doing with you all in the past hour, we were talking about the fact that there had been a massive influx of security outside of this hotel. At that intersection, you had soldiers, you had police, you had reservists all show up, and what we were told is they were concerned that there might be an infiltration from the coastline of Hamas fighters. We were then ordered to come inside of this local hotel. That's where we are right now. We're sheltering in place. In the last 15, 20 minutes, we've heard multiple rounds of shots going on around the hotel. It's become very, very tense. The security people telling us we need to stay in place. We are not allowed to go outside at the moment. I don't know if you can see from our view here, but there are, if we just pan the camera a little bit, there are soldiers that are patrolling the perimeter here, really going to show just how tense and fluid and volatile the situation remains. We're waiting to get more updates about precisely what kind of fighting is going on here in Ashdod. Of course, tensions have been high here in this city for a couple of days because you had 2 days ago a rocket that had been launched from Gaza land in the center of town. As of today, earlier in the day, we heard sirens. Now, earlier this evening, we were in another area. We were in Zakim Junction, which is just north of the Gaza Strip. Ashdod, where we are right now, is about 30 kilometers north of the border with Gaza, and yet still, at this hour, there is concern amongst the security personnel that we have been speaking with that perhaps there has been an infiltration from the coastline of Hamas fighters coming to the city of Ashdod. We are waiting for more information. We will be getting those details to you as we have them. Emily?
Mohammed, how could an infiltration, if that is the case and confirmed to be the case, how can an infiltration like this occur given Israel has said as recently as today that it has more or less restored control?
It is a very good question, Emily, and we are trying to get to the bottom of that as well. As those police and soldiers showed up in the last hour and started patrolling the perimeter, at one point they asked us, when they first showed up on the scene, they asked us if perhaps us or any other journalist in the area were flying a drone. There was some concern that perhaps there was a drone flying above. We don't know if that actually ended up turning out to be the case or not. We're still waiting on more details because it is such a fluid situation and there have not been any operational updates from the security that is assembled here. But everybody is on a very much heightened state of alert, and it really goes to show that something that seemed unthinkable just days ago, in light of what happened on Saturday, there is so much concern right now that there could potentially be infiltration by Hamas fighters in a city like this 30 or so kilometers north of the Gaza Strip. That's something that nobody here would have thought imaginable just a few days ago. If that turns out to have been the case, and we don't know yet if that is the case, if that turns out to be the case, of course, people are going to be asking, at a time when there is a war going on, at a time when there is a heightened state of security, how could something like that happen in Ashdod? We're going to have to get to the bottom of those details at some point later, but for right now, all I can say is that once again, the residents of this town very concerned, the security extremely concerned, and it's very interesting to see just how the atmosphere changes in an instant here, because just a couple of hours ago, we were at the intersection outside of this hotel. When we were out there, at one point there were settlers that showed up, and they were trying to show their support for the reservists, for the troops, the army members that are here. They were dancing on tops of cars. They were playing loud music from their speakers. It was almost a very surreal, almost festive atmosphere in a way that they were showing their support for the soldiers, for the Israeli soldiers. Within 10 minutes of that, everything completely changed. Media was asked to be pushed back. We stayed outside. Initially, we were told that was okay. Then we were all ordered to come indoors because that shooting started. So, as I said, very fluid situation. We're still trying to figure out exactly what is going on, but certainly the situation here in Ashdod, completely different than it was just a couple of hours ago. Emily?
Okay, Mohammed Jamjoom, thanks so much for bringing us up to speed. US President Joe Biden has been speaking within the last hour on the unfolding situation between Israel and Gaza. Let's go to our Washington, D.C. correspondent, Heidi Jo Castro. Heidi, Biden certainly didn't mince words, did he? He did not urge restraint in Gaza on a phone call to the Israeli Prime Minister. What more did he say?
Yeah, Israel has.
That's right, and we're just learning now as well, Emily, that U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will be departing to engage with Israeli counterparts in person. This news just being announced by the U.S. State Department, with Blinken's arrival due on Thursday. This action follows just minutes after, as you said, U.S. President Joe Biden gave a very strongly worded speech to the people of the U.S., to the public, saying that the U.S. stands squarely with Israel.
We're going to continue to stand united, supporting the people of Israel who are suffering unspeakable losses and opposing the hatred and violence of terrorism. My team has been in near constant communication with our Israeli partners and partners all across the region and the world from the moment this crisis began. We're surging additional military assistance, including ammunition and interceptors, to replenish Iron Dome. We're going to make sure that Israel does not run out of these critical assets to defend its cities and its citizens.
And President Biden also saying
I got an
that
idea
among
instead. Why don't we get the leader of Israel
Israelis who were
and the
killed in this
leader
attack,
of
he said
Gaza,
14
or
at
the
least,
Hamas or whoever
were
they are,
also
and put
US
them in a
citizens.
dome.
He also
and let
said
them
that
battle
U.S.
it out.
citizens number among those who were taken to Gaza and are being held hostage. He said that that taking of hostages was, quote, in violation of every code of human morality, and said that now U.S. experts would be available to engage to help Israel's government try to get those hostages recovered. And of course, he mentioned the call that he had. This was the third call in 4 days with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in which Biden said that he told Netanyahu that if it had been the U.S. that were attacked, that the U.S. would respond swiftly and in a way that is overwhelming. Now, it's been reported that Biden did not urge restraint to Netanyahu, which is something that normally the U.S. would do to try to de-escalate situations like this. But he did say something in his public comments, Biden, saying that the U.S., though, if it had been attacked, would uphold the law of war in its response against Hamas. Not saying that Israel should do the same, but perhaps it can be read that this was a warning to do so. And Biden also drew the comparison, saying that Hamas, which he calls terrorists, purposely targeted civilians, and that is something that the U.S. nor Israel should be doing. Also, he did not address this complete siege of the Gaza Strip that was just announced. Biden did not take any questions from reporters, but he did say that the U.S. believes Hamas does not stand for the Palestinian people.
Okay, thanks for bringing us up to speed. Heidi Jo Castro in Washington, D.C. There have also been explosions on Israel's northern border with Lebanon, where the Israeli military has launched artillery strikes in response to rocket attacks by Hezbollah. Hamas's Qassam Brigades also says it has launched a rocket attack from Lebanon. Ali Hashim has the details from southern Lebanon.
There is a significant development with Hamas's Al-Qassam Brigades issuing a statement claiming responsibility for the missiles or the rockets that were launched in South Lebanon today. This is very significant because if we put this beside yesterday's Islamic Jihad's infiltration to the borders towards Israel and engaging in a battle with the Israeli army, we're seeing now a new dynamic here on the Lebanese front. As I said before, this is an operation area, and this operation area is now engaging Palestinian factions on Lebanese soil, and this is the first time since 1982 that Palestinian factions are engaging directly in a fight with the Israelis on the Lebanese borders. This is the development that seems to be different than all what's been happening the past days. Yes, Hezbollah has attacked in the past few days Israeli posts in Shebaa farms. It retaliated yesterday for Israel's airstrike on its positions today, and just a few hours ago, Hezbollah issued a statement claiming responsibility for an attack on an Israeli military vehicle in Avivim with guided missiles. So it's getting more and more complicated. Situation is escalating day after day. However, it's still contained. We can't say that it's out of control, but the more there is blood, the more things are going to go out of control.
Let's bring in Elijah Magnier, who joins us from Paris. He's a military and political analyst. Thanks so much for being on the program, Elijah. It's certainly quite a fluid situation at the moment. The first thing I want to ask you is, we've heard from our correspondent, Mohammed Jamjoom, who's in southern Israel, that there is the potential for an infiltration to have occurred by Hamas. But Israel only today said it had more or less restored control of the region. So how could something like that have been carried out?
Thank you for having me. In the region of Gaza is something, and in Lebanon is a completely different ball game. In Lebanon, the border is long, between 90 and 95 kilometers. There are possibilities of infiltration, but nothing would happen without the knowledge and the will of Hezbollah. In the past, we used to see that the Israelis would close an eye and accuse the Palestinians, because if accusing the Hezbollahis, they would have to retaliate, and they would have to hit Hezbollah, and then Hezbollah would have to hit back. So both sides play it down because they don't want to escalate. Today, we have a different scenario. The Israelis are showing determination that even if Hezbollah pretend they are the Palestinians, even if the Palestinians claim their responsibility, they're retaliating against Hezbollah and against the location of Hezbollah, that both sides know where each side is maintaining a military location and how many people and how many militants, how many military are in each one.
Okay.
So today,
Sorry, Elijah, I just want you to break that down for us, because we're assuming we've got an international audience. So break it down in terms of Hezbollah and Hamas, Lebanon and Israel.
So Hezbollah and Hamas are part of the axis of the resistance. So they indeed work together. They have a united operational room, and they are coordinating their military action. Hamas is in Gaza, but it's also present with a representative in Lebanon, and there is a long history of cooperation between both sides. Now, Lebanon has its own way of approaching what's happening in Gaza, because the situation in Gaza doesn't concern most of the Lebanese. However, it concerns particularly Hezbollah and the Palestinian and all the society that protects Hezbollah. So the axis of the resistance really Yes, sorry.
No, please finish that thought.
So the axis of the resistance, that is not only Hamas and Hezbollah, but also there are factions in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen. They all coordinating their act, and this is why today we heard that the Yemenis are saying that if the Americans interfere, we're going also to interfere. So all that will pour into one operational room that coordinating the acts of every single faction, and they are monitoring closely what's happening with us.
So if I'm to simplify what you've just said, we're in danger here of this war widening out broader into the region.
It depends really how far the Israelis would go. So far, the Israelis have shown that they are planning a ground attack. In case of ground attack, the axis of the resistance will react differently, and we're talking about led by Hezbollah in this case. So far, we have seen how Hezbollah was really working to show the Israelis that it is planning to keep it busy on the northern Israeli frontier, that it is south of Lebanon, and to make sure that there are enough Israeli forces engaged on that borders, so not the bulk of the forces or the Israeli forces would go against Gaza. So that is important for Hezbollah to keep the Israeli engaged.
Our reporter, Zaina Hodder, was reporting from southern Lebanon a couple of days ago, and she was pointing out that she had witnessed what she described as some restraint from Hezbollah to not get involved in this conflict, and particularly given what's happening in Lebanon and the crises that are unfolding with the Lebanese people. She was saying, well, they're actually quite hesitant to really get fully involved in this conflict. Your response to that?
Not quite, because Hezbollah started by hitting the hill of the radar in the Kfar Shuba and Sheba farm. And then today it has launched a laser-guided missile against a tank, that the Merkava tank, that in theory have burned the Israeli tanks. So because the Israelis are not revealing all their losses and they taking time, I am sure that there will be more soldiers that will be announced killed in the next days. This is how the Israelis did 2 days ago, when yesterday there were a clash and they said only one officer was killed. And today we learned that there are 3 officers were killed. This is why we've seen the Israeli retaliation against 3 locations of Hezbollah, really targeting to kill 3 Hezbollah in exchange of 3 Israelis. And it tells us that the commander of the northern front is determined with a specific rule of engagement to respond immediately and retaliate. However, we've seen the attacks today is limited on the demarcation line within 3 or 4 kilometers of the borders.
Israel, as you're saying, is going to have to divide its forces between its border with Gaza and South Lebanon. Does it have the resources to do that? And will that impact anything that's happening in Gaza?
It has, because it has called reservists that are 300,000, plus the 90 professional soldiers and officers that are part of the Israeli army. So for that, the Israelis will have to dedicate around 120,000 to Gaza, 120,000 to Lebanon, and another part as reservists to make sure that the commanding and control will keep it in case of a third front would open from the Golan Heights, or they have to respond to the Houthis or to the Iraqi, if ever they are involved in the battlefield. So they don't really know how the reaction will be. And that's why they are very cautious to put all the forces against Gaza, hence the work of Hezbollah to make sure that is sending on daily messages to Israel that we are ready to engage, plus the several thousand of the Hezbollah special forces that are very visible on the borders, for Israel to see them and to understand the determination of Hezbollah to take part at a certain point, which is not sure. We still have to wait and see the development of the Israelis' attack on Gaza.
What impact will it have if it ends up being a ground invasion, as everyone has been speculating? What impact will that ground invasion into Gaza have on this broader war?
It will depend on Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, really. The Palestinian resistance inside Gaza will be ready to receive the Israelis that in 2014 venture into a few hundred meters only. So if the Palestinian resistance will be able to deal with the advance of the Israelis, how far the Israelis would go, how their military formation is,
off here shortly.
And then it is up to the military operation that is working together in the axis of the resistance to decide if there is a need to open a second frontier or second front, and then perhaps use the drone to start with and go beyond the borders of Lebanon and go really start hitting the inland in Israel.
Okay, thank you so much for your analysis. Elijah Magnier joining us from Paris, a military and political analyst. We're going to head to a break now, but stay with us. We'll bring you more coverage of the Gaza-Israel war and all the latest breaking news on day 4. Do stay with us.
I have to go eat some lunch and run some errands. All right, everybody. I got some errands to run. I need to eat some lunch. And then when I get done with that, I'm going to start streaming again. Pretty much the same thing. I'll just go and find a bunch of live feeds and do the same thing this afternoon. So, all right, we'll see you guys.